Welcome everybody to ELO Heaven. We are back with your resident chess grandmaster Vu CSGO, and of course joined by the lovely Dweg, who just is fresh off some casts at IEM Katowice. How you feeling, man?
Yeah, look, good to be here. It was a pretty fun event, and I'm sure we're gonna all sort of dive into it and see exactly how it all panned out.
Yeah, my first question to you actually, since you did cast so many of those games in general, especially some of those longer days, of course, I was curious if you could harken us back here and maybe regale us with some tales about the best games that you saw there, maybe like your top 2 or 3 favorites.
I think one of them, I mean, it might take some people by surprise, but probably Gambit versus Heroic. That game was really intriguing where you've kind of got Gambit for the last maybe 12 months, 9 months or so of like really been grinding the tier 2 scene. They've been finding a lot of success. They've had a couple of stints at like Dreamhack Masters Winter and IEM New York, but like it's only stints where they get a couple of upsets here or there. And then to face like I don't want to say an on-form Heroic, but certainly one of like a top 5 team in the world, and to like absolutely body them on the third map and have a massive lead on the second one too. So that's probably one, and then probably it's a little bit biased considering it was Renegades, but probably Mouse Sports Renegades was quite a good best of one, right? You know, the rivalry that Dexter's gone over to Mouse Sports.
Yeah.
It's the Aussie team versus them. So like I think in terms of a storyline perspective, maybe not so much in terms of like the actual game itself, but in terms of a storyline, that was probably a really banger best of one, because we didn't get many best of ones actually. It was only the opening games that happened.
Right. That's a bit of a format change. I was curious as to your guys' thoughts on the best of ones as opposed to best of threes. We're so accustomed to these longer tournaments that have every single one be a best of three. And I saw some people arguing for best of ones, which if you're a purist like me, like I prefer everything to be as competitively like integral as possible, right? I want to see the best teams find success because of the fact that they were able to defeat their opponents, not just on one map, but also on like a couple of them, show some strength there. And that gives us a better idea of which team was actually superior, like dead to rights all the time. But it is a little bit of a different look. So I'm curious as to if either of you guys have any strong opinions about best of ones, or if it was just like a refreshing change. What do you guys think?
It's one of those things where everyone loves best of threes. Best of threes are probably clearly better. From your standpoint, from anyone that's really interested in competitive integrity, best of threes are better. But then you have this like weird situation where the players are complaining that all the tournaments, as soon as they went online, just tried to get as many days as possible, right? And the viewers are complaining about burnout. And then as a tournament organizer, you're going, okay, so how do we fix that? Well, we throw in some best of ones. Maybe we try and shorten things up at least a little bit. And then everyone goes, what the fuck, ESL? What is this lazy shit? You're putting out best of ones. And it's like, how do we please everyone like this? So clearly from a competitive integrity standpoint, best threes are clearly better. But if you're trying to shorten things up, I don't think it's a bad idea to throw in best of ones occasionally. I think this was done relatively, well.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump on that and just say like it's nice to be able to have best of ones, especially when you got such a big tournament, right? Like you've got the play-ins, the group. So the play-ins was 2 days. The group stage was 4 days. Obviously, there was some breaks in between. Oh, actually, no, there weren't any breaks between play-ins and groups. But then there's a break until the playoffs go through, and I think like it helps get a lot of teams forward really quickly. And it's not as if like every game's a best of one, right? Like I think if every game in the play-in was a best of one, like people would get the shits, and like I'm sure they'd kick up a storm. But knowing that if you lose a best of one and you've only got to win 2 BO3s in the lower bracket to go through, like I just think it gets the play-ins over and done with so much quicker. So then like the big name teams can actually just go on into the groups, deal with the invited teams, and then sort of not have an easy road to the playoffs, but then you're just not playing like best of 3 after best of 3, and it's just long as hell.
Yeah, it's a bit of a compromise, right? They're trying to like they have the best of both worlds where you have a shorter format overall, but you don't sacrifice too much of the competitive integrity. So it's a bit of a new look. Like I don't necessarily mind it, especially since it is just the opening matches. It kind of gets you hyped for the whole tournament. I feel like you get those fast-paced actions going in. I wanted to ask Vu specifically, since I just asked Dweg, obviously, what his best matches were, his favorite matches were. What's the best one for you? Did you like the CIS era? Did you finally watch more VP and find out that they're not as frustrating to watch after all, or are you just more of a Liquid fan here? What's going on?
I mean, so outside of the best of ones, like I'll say one more thing about the best of ones is that the problem with best of ones a lot of the time is that if two teams, like if you do I guess like it's a GSL format with best of ones is like the most common way. I know this is a little bit different, but Or is it different? What? Let's not talk about that. Okay. The problem is if two teams get upset, then you have these situations that we see a lot actually, where you have like two really good teams playing each other because they both got upset in best of ones, and then you have a guaranteed shit team going through because they got a best of one upset, and then they play the weaker team from the other side. That's the only problem with best of ones, or like the main problem with best of ones in most tournament formats. But it's one of those problems where you have to have like there has to be lesser tournaments in order for like bigger tournaments and bigger matchups to have more prestige and to be more interesting. Like the existence of best of ones and the existence of Astralis versus Movistar Riders or like some other low level team, right? The existence of those are what make Team Liquid versus Astralis amazing, right? Like you're waiting for it. There's anticipation. When every tournament wants to be the biggest, best tournament, and they all run all best of threes, that's when you get like this viewer fatigue. But how are you going to tell a tournament organizer not to just like make their tournament, the best physically possible? On the VP front, for anyone that didn't watch, I think this was on the last episode.
Yeah,
where I was a little bit frustrated with the VP. I still I don't love it. I watched a few more games. I don't love it. But I mean to get it done, and Yakindar, I've put him in 2 videos now.
honors.
I was hoping to get him with a voiceover, but there was some logistical problems. I don't want to out the exact problems, but there was some problems with actually getting him to do a voiceover, even though he was very friendly. And very willing to help out. But I love Yakindar. It's just the team plays they just don't play these spots out naturally. They do a few things that are just in my opinion, clearly over aggressive, but their players are good enough. And I see that as a team that's, they're kind of ready for a very hard fall off when their players aren't just winning duels and stuff. But I mean, we do have the research. We do have the CIS era. Yeah. And I would like to mention that I said this at the beginning of the year when we were talking about the HLTV rankings, because what the HLTV rankings did, in case anyone's wondering, there's a huge thread on this. NA and EU events were classified New York NA or whatever. Those were classified as S tier events, and EU and NA events were equivalent as far as that was concerned for ratings and stuff, which is probably a little bit crazy, given that EU is so much more competitive. I think that's why you had so many NA players in the top, or you had so many Furia players in the top 20 just because of the way the rankings were working. But then the CIS events were a huge, a tier step down, and that's why you had very few CIS players outside NaVi in the top 20. At least that's what I understand from the thread. And I was saying it before, it seems like the CIS region is better than it's being given credit for. And it seems like we're getting confirmed that the CIS region is better than it's getting credit for. And it's going to be a little bit more if you just look back at history, whoa, they had so few teams in the top 10. I would argue they should have had more teams in the top 10 last year. VP probably should have been in there, in my opinion. And, there should have been a couple more players in the top 20 probably from CIS if the tournaments were ranked the way I think they should be ranked. And then this would seem a little bit less crazy, but it's still pretty ridiculous,
What do you think, Dweg? Do people undersell the confidence that they have in the CIS teams in general? Do you think that finally they're getting the comeuppance that they deserve, given the fact that obviously Spirit absolutely stomped Astralis in that final map? And then, of course, you have Gambit coming through. I think, 4 teams, right, in the playoffs of IEM Katowice, which is more than any other region.
It's kind of crazy, right? I think that for the CIS teams, it's been a long time coming. They don't get many opportunities at the top events, and when they do, I feel like they almost blow it a lot of the time. We saw for Gambit at Masters, they beat Cloud9 and Complexity, and then went down to Astralis, had a tough draw in the playoffs there. But I think the one thing that when I look at CIS teams, I think that are holding them back, maybe not so much in the tier 1 events, but certainly in the tier 2 events when they play, is I just don't think they take it quite as seriously as when they play in the top events. They're super wild, they're pretty slow on T side, but then they just start getting super aggressive all of a sudden and being very individual. So I think for the CIS teams, they've got the mechanical skill to be able to really boast themselves, but I think it just comes down to maybe taking a little bit more from the European teams in terms of a structured approach, getting more opportunities at the top events. Like I know that NaVi have obviously been there for a very long time, but when you think about like over the years, right, you had like Flipside that like were around there somehow qualifying for like every fucking major. I don't know how they managed to do that every single time. You had like QB Fire there, you had Windstrike, but I think now we're kind of in a bit of a dawn where there might be CIS teams staying around rather than just having a stint out of nowhere because their players are completely unknown and they're not like upsetting and that they're actually getting some decent results. And I guess we kind of have to wait and see in the playoffs because, yeah, there might be 4 out of 6 CIS teams, but are any of them going to be in the finals? I guess we kind of have to just wait and see on that one.
I want to say one thing on the not taking it super seriously thing. I was so surprised by Spirit specifically recently because I analyzed DreamHack November. They go into the finals. They like don't know flashbangs exist. They would just get into like it was like it got onto Train, which is a map they're supposed to be amazing on. They get on T side. They just drop ladder. Nobody's in ladder. No free kills. Okay, Ivy. Nobody's giving us free kills in Ivy. Well, who would have expected that? And then they just like walk out. It's like one flash, walk out. Like they got no smokes, no utility. It's just like I guess they haven't given us, they haven't contested us over aggressive angles, which is like what you get in matchmaking. Like if you play Mirage in matchmaking, if your opponents give up middle and they just play passive on A with like an op or ticket, you just lose because you don't know what you can't execute. And that's what it felt like. And I was like so low on Spirit after that. And then they just like show up and it's like, oh, by the way, we actually know how to play the game. And it's like, okay, where was this, man? Like this is missing. Jesus.
Yeah, that's a key point to make about Spirit specifically, because obviously Dexter's like the prime star of that particular role. And I wonder if this is another angle. So Dweg brought up the fact that they maybe have taken some European structure. And to that point, like over on its server time, a point that was made by Maui Snake was that the Team Spirit are basically like the NIP of Russia, where they come in and they have like a set plan, but they're never really going to place above and they're never really going to place below. They're very consistent, but it's like playing a team that you've played countless other times, even though you maybe this is your first time doing it. It's like very predictable, very ironclad. It's like they're kind of rigid in that respect, which you don't necessarily expect out of a CIS team especially. And of course, you can look over at Gambit as well. They've kind of got that notoriety building, the fact that they do have a bit of a system, the fact that it's not just frags. And that contrasts so polarizingly against VP, Virtus.Pro, who play this style that I want to linger on this point as well. The fact that they've basically broken a lot of the rules in a way, or at least they've bent them, right? With especially Yakinder's forward-facing play, Sanji a walking bank account, obviously James just opping forever because he saves every round. Like, and to some extent, these are exaggerations. You can't find this every single round, but a lot of these ring more true than people will think if they've just casually watched the games, or especially if they've slept on VP for any particular reason. I mean, Yakinder was even doing it against Simple and company, right? Like, this is not something that doesn't work against the highest levels of competition, even though it looks like it shouldn't. So what do we reckon here? Because I feel like it's certainly like there's multiple facets to this particular angle, but the idea that the Russian teams are finding so much success, the CIS region doing that, it doesn't seem like there's one specific thing you can point to. It's not just individual success. It's not just the adoption of a style or a structure. It seems like all of 3 of the up-and-coming teams that are coming in behind NaVi have found success for different reasons entirely. What do you guys make of that?
I don't know if you jump in here, Boo, but like I just want to say for VP, right? Like I don't cast many tier 1 events, and if I do, like I'm normally on the B stream or the second channel, and I don't typically see that much of like tier 1 CS in general in comparison to like what my normal schedule is. But like VP are weird for me. I casted them at 9 to 5-5, where they lost to K23 in like the quarters.
Yeah.
And then in 9 to was it 9 to 5-7, or it might have been Snow Sweet Snow. They lose to Gambit, and it looks like they've just got no idea what they're doing. And it's like, how is this team finding success in the tier 1 team, the tier 1 tournaments, but yet when they're down at tier 2, they're losing to like, you know, okay, Gambit I can give some exception to, but losing to like teams like K23 without even taking a map or like getting to double digits, I find it so weird, and maybe not so much inconsistent, but I just think that for VP, like when things aren't going right for them, things go really wrong really quickly. And I don't know, like Sanji is anyone would hate to be Sanji, right? Like, I've seen him glass cannon an MP9, like, because he's dropping an AWP for Jame. And it's you get to a point and it's like, is Sanji just there to drop weapons and that's it? Like, you almost never see him on a rifle ever. Like, T side, CT side, he's just always on fucking SMGs all the time.
How do they make it work? Vu, you've watched their games recently. How do they make it work?
I think this is actually like one of those problems where when I was watching, so I wasn't paying attention too much to like tier 1 pro CS for a couple of years in like 2017, 2018. I come back and a Vanguard has like been like really good, you know, everyone's talking about them, but they like, this is the beginning of their little slump, you know? And I watched the games and I'm like, this disgusts me. Like, this is horrible CS. Like, I can't believe these guys are supposed to be good. And that was when they were like starting their slump. So I just got like this horrific like opinion of the way VP plays when they were still a Vanguard. I think they might have just switched to VP or something like that. But like I tried to do a deep dive on them and I was just like, this is the worst shit I've ever seen. Like I've talked about this round before, I'll talk about it again. They got like this anti-eco and they double arch and they get smoked off arch and then they just kind of like sit there for like 10 seconds and then eventually rotate, and it's like, so you just left like a 10-second gap where someone could they could have just been running right up truck with pistols and just won the round. And it's just like that type of thing being left in. And you know, I think they're better now, but you still kind of see that type of thing where it's just like, if they're just not on point, if they're just getting out-aimed in ways that they shouldn't, but like, you know, they can still have it happen. They don't have like, I feel like they don't necessarily have that backing, where it's like, you know, if you're on a B day, like if you're on your B game, right, and you're playing a team, like, do you have that structural backbone where you can fall back and be like, it's okay, we're fine, we can still like play you know, we can change things up, we can, you know, we can pivot, we can make this work. I don't really see that too much from VP. I think that's a bit of an issue. They kind of have like their way of playing and maybe they have a bit of adjustments, but then, you know, they can still lose to teams like FaZe or K23 who just like almost like lean into an aggressive play sometimes and then, you know, just win and they just kind of come at them. I could definitely see VP, I don't know, you would think they'd be figured out by now, but I could still see them having, you know, kind of a timeline where they get a little bit figured out and they stop doing quite as well. It's hard to say. They've still got like a lack of games against like the true top opposition.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many times they've played teams like Big. The last time they played them in December and won at Flashpoint. Before that, it's like June. You know, how many times have they played Astralis? Like, I'm not sure if they've even played them
Feels
recently.
like never, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they've got a little bit of a lack of something there, which is what they'll need to push them over to the next level. And honestly, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if they could beat a team like Astralis, but I don't know if they could beat them consistently.
That's a point, too, to make about Astralis specifically. I think this is something that you mentioned last time, Vu, that you feel like Astralis is on the down slump. And initially, I might have pushed back on that because, like, well, it's only one event. But obviously, being taken down by Spirit of all opposition certainly seems like it cements your claim there. And, well, you've got a lot of bragging rights to flounder in this particular episode because, of course, Fallen is also popping off. But lingering on Astralis specifically, what do you make of their current demise? Is that just a one-off upset in a best of 3? Because a 16-1 feels pretty definitive.
Yeah, 16-1 is very definitive. The thing I'll give them to their credit, I didn't actually watch this specific game, admittedly, but I've done a lot of looking at Spirit as a team and the way they play Dust 2, at least up until like, you know, January, unless they've changed anything drastically.
They certainly haven't brought in
heavy on
Bubsky,
Cat.
so
they play really heavy on Cat. They just send like they go kind of late on long and then they'll just be like Mir, go Cat, go kill, like on their CT side, which is, I specifically made a video like a month or two ago. You're playing Dust 2 wrong, where I say there's no Cat player, right? Like you take long and then you have your team spread out. And sometimes you play Cat like occasionally, but you got 3 A players that control long. Spirit, they're playing Dust 2 wrong, I guess. Like a lot of CIS teams kind of do that. They have this weird like aggression on Cat where they just send like players Cat. Sometimes they like go really weak on long compared to what you're really expecting. and it seems to work. And so I could see a team getting pretty caught off guard by that. You would think, Astralis, I'm sure, did their research and like knew what was going on, but you could definitely see a team getting caught off guard by that type of play. And then if you can't adjust, and you can't like pivot and make things work, then I could definitely see that kind of going, the wrong direction. But the reason I was kind of low on Astralis before was because it felt like they were starting to make some plays against some teams that almost felt like kind of like desperation plays, like plays I wouldn't necessarily expect from Astralis playing against weaker teams, where they do like really kind of gambly plays that suggested to me that they weren't like fully confident in the way that things were going for them. And that's like the feel I got. So it's like hard to like be really confident when it's just like, it feels like they're going a little, feels like they're kind of doing it. That's kind of what I got from them. Right. So, it still kind of feels that way. It could just be they've adjusted their style and they'll swing right back, but it kind of feels like they're not as confident in the way they're playing as before. And Bubsky did say that they're going to try and work them in on several maps apparently. So, maybe this explains it.
It might. I mean, it was the CT side of Spirit that got them to 15 rounds in a row, and specifically. So it's not even like
they didn't finish it off.
Yeah, they just couldn't do it. It's just one more round, guys. But they did it next time. The force by answer back. Did you review this series at all, Dweg? Are you familiar with the way that Astralis fell?
It was funny, actually, because I think I was watching a little bit of Train. I watched the first half of Train, and I went and did something, and I was like, I'm just going to keep like the stats up on HLTV on my phone while I go and do something. And I look back, and I'm like, what? It's like 14-0. I was like, what is going on here? Yeah, like I didn't watch the game. I watched round 16 and was devastated they didn't get the 16-0.
Yeah,
and the clutch came in for Majesk. But look, I think overall for Astralis, like the way I look at it for them, like I didn't get to cast them at all. I think that they were on mainstream. They could have been on B stream, at least from one of the days I wasn't working. But like for me, they have to like bomb out or at least not make playoffs for like 3 events in a row, or maybe 2 events in a row, for me to kind of look at them and be like, okay, I'm kind of getting doubts, because we just always know that even if they have like rocky group stage, even if they have a rocky tournament, they're always going to bounce back. And I look at them, and even though the playoff bracket looks incredibly stacked, I think that they've got a decent chance of at least making it to the finals. Can they go on and win the event? I guess we kind of have to just wait and see from that. But it just seemed like on Dust 2 that like everything was going the way of Spirit. They were playing with a lot of freedom. They were running double-AWPs, and just like they were finding so many opening kills on such a consistent basis. And like Mir was just doing Mir things, right? And I just think that like I look back and try to watch at least the first half, just kind of skip through it on the VOD. And it looked like, I don't want to say Spirit were playing perfect CS, but like they were hitting their shots, they were constantly getting man advantages, and it seemed like no matter what Astralis were doing, they were always on the back foot. They weren't just able to crack that CT side, and there were even like some of the gun rounds that like weren't even close. Like there was like 3 players, sometimes even like 4 players staying alive, I think, where they just could not find momentum, which is kind of difficult to think about it, right? When you think that they won Inferno, Train went like almost 30 rounds. I think it was like 28, 29 rounds. And then you go into Dust 2 and you lose like 1-16. It's it's a bit of a shocker, really.
I got a bit of an abstract question. I know we like to think in the abstracts here up in ELO Heaven. So I wanted to pitch this to you guys, since you guys are both analysts in your own right. So I want to know what you guys make of this concept, because I've been looking at CT sides more than I've been looking at T sides lately, because I feel like that's where you get a lot of a better read on tendencies. In this current meta, what we're seeing most often, I feel like, is the CTs will inevitably crumble eventually with regards to their economy, but if they can stitch together enough money, they almost always go for double-up setups almost regardless of the team. Like it seems imperative you need somebody who's familiar with a secondary sniper role, who can be a hybrid maybe in that sense, if you're going to have like longevity on most maps on CT. Maybe there's some examples of this not being the case, like maybe on Vertigo CT side, you might just never get the secondary op out, but even then it can be quite powerful. You can hold obviously mid and ramp. So what I noticed in this particular matchup when Astralis take on Spirit, it feels like when you get off to a really good start on CT side, even if it's not obviously 15-0, it feels like it's so hard to eventually crack that site unless you string together a lot of rounds in a row, which is usually the inverse because usually Ts just have it easier. It seems even with all the economy changes, it still doesn't really favor the Ts if the CTs are already up to a start. And maybe that's momentum, maybe that's the economy rules, but it just feels like, especially when teams are really proficient with secondary ops, it's almost impossible to take on to some of these sites or get really any map control. You're punished for almost every peak, and they can always reinvest into utility as well. So I'll throw that back to you, Dweg, real quick. I want to know your opinion on this sort of concept. Do you just spend more time looking at the CT sides generally when you're doing prep? Do you think that they end up being more impactful than they have been? Because I feel like it's almost always make or break.
Yeah, look, honestly, when I have a look at demos and when I have a look at teams, I'm actually mainly focusing on like setups and rotates rather than like how they're running double AWPs and things like that. Like I find it for me, like trying to, I mean, certainly the tier 2 teams can be really difficult to read sometimes, but trying to like get reads on rotation, set up, gamble players and what have you. I think for the double AWPs, like you will find teams that are very proficient with it, teams that maybe aren't very proficient. I always get the feeling that CIS teams, like no matter who's running double AWP, unless it's like an absolute bot with an AWP, like can always do damage.
Right.
And Spirit are one of those teams where I think that they've really maybe not struggled, but have a look at like Balance, right? Like I think that maybe in 2018 he was a hot prospect. A lot of people were talking about him. You know, this guy's a gun. He's super consistent. You know, he's very flashy, and then all of a sudden you sort of get into like 2019 2020 and he's like kind of average. Like I honestly, when I was watching Spirit with Balance, I never had that like, or maybe it was that one game out of nowhere where I was like, oh, you know, Balance is back. Like I never got the feeling that they were always lacking in consistency. They brought in Dexter and Patsy. Yeah, maybe Patsy, like they had that whole weird thing where they even like subbed out Chopper, right? In one of the maps. They had like no in-game leader. I don't think that that's happening anymore. Like they're using Patsy as like a 5+1, but they've brought in Dexter, who found so much form playing on a Sparta. You know, got some decent veterans on that team like Dima and Sofix, and he's just a guy that is like never has a bad game. And even when he has a bad game, I almost feel like it's him, not that he's missing shots, but he's just like not getting the impact because of the positions he's playing, or like the T side, or if he's playing CT side and they're just like, let's say he's playing out towards long on A and they're constantly getting con and short water control and there's a lot of B hits or what have you. Whenever I watch Dexter, like even when he's posting up low numbers, I never feel like he's having a bad game. And I think that's something that Spirit are working really well with their double AWP setup, is that Dexter is so damn consistent that all you need is like that secondary play of like Chopper to pick up the AWP. And if he can just try and support and pick off every now and then to get an advantage, then it's just going to keep rolling for them.
So there's a few things, there's a few points. First, I think the double AWP thing, I haven't noticed it maybe as much as you have, but it's definitely something that kind of counterintuitively I think makes a lot of sense when you think about the economy. When I think about the economy currently, I'm thinking a lot of like, you eventually have that really like the strung together with like duct tape and like band-aids by what happens on CT side, where it's like you got 2 Deegs and you got like an MP9, you got a M4 and a FAMAS. Like that's like the standard, like we're fucked here, like our economy sucks, like please let us win this round. You inevitably have one of those, and I've noticed that like teams that win those rounds a lot are teams that do really well, because you those are huge rounds, because not only you get the round, which gives you some backing, but then you also upgrade all your guns to AKs, right?
Yes.
You got like this huge benefit. But it kind of counterintuitively makes sense that 2 ops, like double op setups work really well, because when it comes to a double op setup, either your opponents can't really enter the bomb site because you're just picking them apart, or you lose the round and you probably save, right? Like it's a really clear like differentiation between like round 1, we've got like 5 alive because we just picked you off with our ops, or round lost and we saved 3 guns because we knew it was over really early, right? Like that seems to make a lot of sense for that type of situation to work out with the current way the economy is working. And it especially makes a lot of sense for it to work out with CIS, where like there's a lot of just aggressive, you know, people looking for picks.
Right.
And especially with Spirit, where, you know, I think everyone on that team has been capable of picking up an op before, I feel like. But, you know, I look at Sum Young as like a very strong opper, especially, you know, just kind of getting in the right position. And then Dexter is an opper that is, you wouldn't think that when you know, when you're talking about like a hot prospect, like Dexter's so sick, he's so good. And then you go and look at him and he's like, just kind of like in the right spots a lot. Like he just kind of doesn't mess up positioning wise, and that's not at all what you're expecting when you like you think of a hot prospect. You're thinking like Kenny S, right? Like, you know, old school Kenny S, you know, when he was still good at the game.
Yeah, they have to aim their way out of situations that they
Yeah.
get themselves into, as opposed to just
Yeah.
being in the right spots. Yeah,
Exactly. Dexter is like he repeaks a bit too much. Like that's my one critic. Well, actually, I've got a couple criticisms. My main criticism in that he repeaks too much. Like he just like he'll miss a shot that he should land, and then this is like a really common thing with players like that I've coached is like you miss a shot and then you frustration repeak. It's like, oh, I gotta hit that shot. Let's go back for it again. Like let's try it the second time. And I imagine, you know, especially over an event like this, if they're practicing a lot of tier 1 teams. You know that might get kind of grinded out of him. The other problem I have with him is you know, maybe he was just like rusty because like when I went in and looked shortly after he joined Spirit, I looked at a bunch of his games and he was like guaranteed if he had a rifle for like one horrific whiff, like at least per game. Like per game, he would have one horrific rifle spray that just like misses 20 bullets. Just like, how do you even miss that? Like, this is pathetic. Like JDM-esque with the rifle. He seemed like okay with it, like outside, but he really seemed like more of, you know, he kind of needs to have the op. But you know, I really think that's, you know, Dexter has great, you know, great future potential. It's kind of crazy actually. CIS is what they've got Shiro, they've got Dexter, they had Idis Balance, you know, when he was good. Exit Power, yeah, they've got Exit Power, they've got, well, obviously Jame, right? They've got so many op talents. It's actually kind of crazy to think about.
it's a huge storyline coming out of the CIS region specifically. Like obviously, right now the most successful players from that region in general are all primary snipers. And you know, there's a point out in the chat from Bill who says something to the effect of Flamey, if he's going to get replaced, he's going to have to be replaced by a secondary opper. Really one of his saving graces is apparently that he is like, you know, pretty solid on the AWP, but we have seen him and maybe some other players on NaVi specifically be kind of liable with those rifles instead of AWPs in their hands, right? And obviously I'm casting my mind back to more like Edward Zeus era where they pretty much didn't matter what gun you gave them, they weren't going to do much. So we look at their current lineup, it does seem like it's had more success. And I kind of want to contrast the way we've broken down Spirit and to a lesser extent Gambit and obviously VP. Do you guys think that NaVi really are the #1 team in the world? Obviously, like in the HLTV world rankings, they were overtaken by Astralis off of the back of course, that embarrassing Spirit loss, which is puzzling. But even behind that, it does feel like NaVi are the best, but I don't know how out of reach they are from the other CIS teams specifically. There's always been like a grudge match between those. Dweg, you mentioned like K23 taking VP 2-0, but unthinkable stuff happening in those kinds of tournaments. So obviously, if it can happen in that sense, it could probably happen anywhere else. And VP kind of looked competitive against NaVi. So do you rate that NaVi will continue to be like the predominant team coming out of CIS? I feel like it's kind of an easy prediction to make, but there seems to be an outside chance that in those head-to-head matchups, it can go either way.
Yeah, I kind of want to think that, like, even when I go back to IEM New York CIS, like, when you put CIS teams up against CIS teams, like, it's so difficult to call. Like, we had Ethereal, like, the Pashnoi, Robin, Zorti, and Kenzie take a map off NaVi, and you're like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, it's, I don't know what it is. Like, I suppose it is the whole rivalry thing, but when you put CIS teams up against European teams, I think it's a lot easier to kind of have the scale from 1 to 4. But I think that, honestly, you put Gambit, Spirit, or VP up against NaVi in a best of 3, I think any of them could, like, you know, give them a good time and give them a good run for their money. I think there could be some upset potential. I still want to lean, obviously, for NaVi being the best team in CIS just because they've been there for so long. Whereas for the other teams, like, they're only kind of on the rise. But in a CIS derby, like, anything is possible. And I think the players know that as well, because we've seen how many times in CIS events, like in the RMRs, that like you get crazy map losses and even upset victories coming through, not only like the top CIS teams, but even like the middle ranked ones as well against some of the top teams.
What I want to know is what Vu thinks about this whole CIS derby, as you called it, right? Like, I want to see what are Vu's thoughts about the second best team VP actually contending for any sort of throne, right? This is a situation that feels so out of reach now, but if the success that VP could have could find them, you know, getting those wins at the highest level of competition, is NaVi's system not even one to follow anymore? Like, are they just too far of an outlier? What do you think?
I mean, when it comes to NaVi, like when it comes to regional matchups,
yeah,
they've always been like, it's always crazy. It's always this weird, you know, any team can kind of win. You had North beat Astralis twice to win an event when MSL came MVP, right? Like this is regional matchups in a nutshell.
Right.
And then you have this situation now where it's like NaVi is close enough to these other teams in terms of like, you know, ability that these matchups are going to happen a good amount, you know, at least, you know, now, in real events, right? Usually when you look at these games, they happen in like the qualifier, they happen in like, you know, smaller events. And then you don't really see, you know, at least recently too much of like, I guess like Astralis and Heroic are like the, you know, the two Danish teams that like could meet up. Then you have usually like one team is clearly better than the other. But I think when you include the fact that the CIS styles are oftentimes like especially more explosive than any other region, I think you have even more like volatility in the regional matchups. I don't think you know, when it comes to NaVi being the best in the world, they could literally be kind of dethroned by the fact that they struggle against other CIS teams. Like that would not surprise me at all. And it makes a lot of sense actually, from what I see from NaVi in that like they rely really heavily on simple and electronic to kind of open up rounds sometimes. And electronic, I've said this before, statistically you would think he's inconsistent, but like personally I don't think he's very inconsistent. I just think that sometimes he's forced to go like more aggressive than he wants to get an opening, to like look for something. And then you play them against someone like Ikindar, you know, an opera like Dexter, right? Like they're gonna struggle, whereas like because these players are just so individually talented, it's crazy. But they just don't have necessarily, at least in the past, they haven't had what it took to beat EU teams that were more fundamentally sound. And then now if they're going to meet in the middle of a tournament and Dexter's on point and Mir's on point, who can definitely, you know, they're not simple and electronic, but on a good day, they can stand toe to toe to simple and electronic. That's where you have like these crazy mismatches. And if they want to beat those CIS teams, I think they're going to need to add in another layer.
It's one of the things that I keep thinking back to as well, is the fact that NaVi were recently crowned the best team for all but a week with these weekly rankings coming out. And it was a little dubious anyway, maybe contentious that they had just barely eclipsed Astralis at the previous event, but it did look a little bit more dominant with a 2-0 at the Blast, which I'm not 100% sure if we covered in the previous episode, but the core gist of it is that NaVi were able to come out and absolutely wreck heads in a way that felt kind of reminiscent of that IEM Katowice win from last year, where they seemed to just take everybody and nobody could stand to them. Obviously, they did drop a map to Vitality at that event by comparison, but now we look into the future for them, and I think, given that they have fallen recently to Liquid, there might be a bit of a passing of the torch here. And people have said before, specifically like Richard Lewis over at the Deserto channel has said that he thinks there's not going to be a top one team for quite a while. It's just going to be this sort of parity era again, sort of repeat of a couple of years back. And we're just going to see a bunch of teams trading that up for quite a while, particularly with those very, very fast-paced weekly HLTV rankings that keep coming out, where it might not give you the most accurate measure of what's happening more in the broad strokes. And it's just going to tell you who's the best on form according to the last tournament, which is sort of diminishing returns on that angle. So obviously you've been a bit of a Liquid cheerleader here, Vu. And you said that Fallen specifically was going to come out and absolutely body people and all these outlandish claims that would never happen in the real world. So how do you feel that they were absolutely dumpstered by NaVi and definitely didn't destroy them? What do you think?
Sorry. Say that again. Say the last the last sentence. Just repeat the last sentence.
So Liquid definitely lost miserably to NaVi. They didn't even make it close. It was so easy for the CIS squad, and that's why they're in the semifinals. I mean, I'll just refresh the Liquipedia bracket real quick here, and I see they just got it wrong on the Liquipedia side. Okay, it's definitely that Liquid is in those quarters. So no, what do you seriously make of that matchup? Because I know you were watching that. You were DMing me about it. So
yeah, I mean, Fallen hasn't looked amazing. You know, I know that like our DMs. Hold on, I think this is at the top of our DMs was this talk about Fallen. What did you say? Oh yeah, you posted me Fallen's KD 8-3-15 on Inferno.
yeah,
and then at that point I was like, map 3 OT. Like I was happy for it. I mean, if they can get map 3 OT versus NaVi, you know, I feel pretty comfortable with that. And then they won. And I hit him with the easy for Fallen.
Easy in OT, it always happens.
Easy for Fallen. I don't know. I'm not really a Fallen fan. Like I'll say it, I'm specifically not a Fallen fan. However, I've thought for a while that what Liquid needed, you know, was an AWPer, and they needed a real IGL, a real AWPer, as in an AWPer that's, you know, capable and willing to AWP on the, I've said this before, the spots that aren't fun, you know, T-side Inferno, stuff like that, where it's just like, you need someone that's willing, you know, he'll buy the big green gun and he'll do the role, but, you know, he might not be, nobody loves AWPing T-side Inferno, or like T-side Nuke, I feel like might even be better than T-side Inferno sometimes. But, you know, you've needed that for a while, and I've wanted Stewie to get unleashed a little bit, and I feel like he's absolutely been unleashed compared to what he was, you know, in the last several months. In this event, he's looked a lot, in my opinion, a lot better. You know, can they hold up? They are about to play Astralis, but I think Fallen, I think he's got a winning record against Astralis historically, doesn't he? He's at least they're a team that, you know, Fallen's an IGL that is capable of beating Astralis, and that could be a change they need as well.
Right.
You know, they could definitely need that type of change. They haven't, I don't know, they've looked shaky, I feel like, but they've looked better. And I wouldn't say I was like, what word did you use? I'm not a cheerleader. This happens sometimes. I'm like streaming and people come into my chat and they're like, why are you hating on the M4A1? Why are you hating on the A1S, bro? You're a hater. And it's like, listen, man, it's a gun. It's an inanimate object. I can't be a fan or a hater of an inanimate object. It's just, I look at the stats and the stats say this gun is dog shit. Okay. And similarly, I look at the stats, not the stats. The stats say Fallen struggled. Okay, I look at what's going on. This is objective view. Okay, I'm not. There's no emotion attached to it, despite the fact that the last episode would suggest there was some emotion attached to my statements.
Yeah, maybe
there was no emotion. It was completely level-headed, objective view of the scenario. You know, that's all it was.
All right, Dweg, let's hear your opinion on the new Liquid. Obviously, they had a bit of a rocky start, but do you agree that they've looked better, shaky? Do you think that they have what it takes to hang out at top 5, top 3? Easy?
I think, I don't know about easy, but like, I think top 5 is a realistic goal for Liquid, and I think it's a doable goal. The one thing that, I don't know how much of a point you kind of need to go into it, but like, why did this take so long?
Yes.
Like, maybe you can understand for Fallen, like where he was, and you can understand maybe there's like a bit of contractual stuff or what have you. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. But how did Liquid go on for so long without an in-game leader and a proper AWP? They've brought someone in, and I think a lot of people, when everyone saw Fallen coming through, they're like, all right, you know, we've got someone who has found a lot of success in the past, someone that maybe isn't an up-and-comer, that a lot of people thought that maybe that's where Liquid were going, and then they move him over to the in-game leader role, and like Vu said, like Stewie looks really good, like Fallen, I think, can lead this team to a championship side. How long that's going to take, like, it's going to be a big test, obviously, in the semifinals for them. But I kind of just look at it, and I think even for the players, like, it's got to be like a breath of fresh air, right? Knowing you've actually got a highly skilled AWPer that has got a ton of experience who can also call for you. As I think that takes a lot of pressure off some of the guys from Liquid too, just to kind of know that they've got that person to rely on. I think there was like a bit of an interview sort of saying like how maybe Stewie's doing like a little bit of secondary calling, and maybe like if he's getting a bit of a feeling or a bit of a read on something, they'll go with it. But as long as the synergy is there between Stewie and the mid calls, Fallen as your main caller, and then mouz is working together, like as long as that trio is like working together, then I think that this could be a team that could make top 5 and contest championships.
I think Stewie mid-round calling is something that, like, I think that's one of those things that happens that Stewie ends up IGLing, where it's just like, you know, he plays this style where he's going to be able to get some reads. He's going to be able to get into those mid rounds, and he's just going to know what to do, and he's going to be able to call it. That's why I didn't really love him as like the main IGL, because I felt like he doesn't really have what it takes to really make it happen when he's not, you know, necessarily got those reads to the level that I would hope. So, you know, I've always loved him as a second caller, not as a main caller. And it makes perfect sense, you know, if Fallen takes over main calling, and then Stewie's, you know, he's put himself in a scenario where he's just like, he knows what's going on. You know, that's perfect, you know, and he's going to win you some rounds, but it's never going to be like, in my opinion, it's never going to be a highly consistent when Stewie's main calling. I think you needed some more backbone. I actually think that run they had in 2019 kind of hurt them to some extent, where you're saying, you know, how did they go so long without an IGL and an AWPer? I think that run they made in 2019, where they just stomped everyone, mostly with, you know, really sick rifling, kind of hurt them in the long run, because they go, well, we made that run in 2019. Do we need an AWPer? Like, do we, you know, we were mostly kind of, you know, Nitro was calling, but like even Nitro, he wasn't a caller before he joined Liquid, as far as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure he started calling and started opping while on Liquid, right? So they're just like, oh, we can just do it again, just repeat this, you know, everything surely is going to be fine. And then, you know, it takes them a while where they're like, guys, we might have just, you know, it might have been lightning in a bottle. Like, maybe we can't do this again, you know?
That's such a tough part about the Liquid side specifically, because if you consider how dominant they were with just rifles, as you said, Vu, my analysis of that is, you know, the talent on every single member. When Nitro's on form, he looks like a great AWPer as well, somehow, because of course that's not his home role, so to speak. And everybody else, you're not going to remove Naf, Twist. I mean, eventually they did, but like Stewie even. Obviously, you're not going to remove any of these players. Elige, kind of like the franchise player of Liquid, we'll say. Been around for quite a while himself. So my only target at that point is probably Nitro for a dedicated AWP IGL. They kind of screwed around, to be honest, when they brought Grim in, but he seems to be gelling fine, and it just took a while. Like, I think if they made the Fallen move then, that probably would have helped them catapult back up, especially given that they had no success in the online era, relatively, until that ending, right? Until we saw the Global Challenge 2020 come out towards the end, and that's pretty much where they found their only success, just to get clean swept by Astralis in the final anyway. So it doesn't even really, like, it's sort of a bittersweet ending where, yeah, Twist is on his way out the door, he frags out finally, gets it, you know, struts his stuff for FaZe, right? So we got to give him some credit for that. But I just feel like there's something that was so obviously missed, that the 2-in-1 package deal of an AWPer IGL is pretty rare in CS now. They finally go for one. It is still a bit of a gamble because he's been around for so long. And yeah, like we talked about earlier, in a bit of a half cynical manner, his stats have not been the best so far, but at least he's got the calling mantle back. And I think that's probably the biggest change for them. It's still a bit of a early days to call it, probably. Like, we need to see them in action for more series, see if a team like Astralis, who are tactically minded, can figure them out. But I guess that brings that to my next sort of question for you guys, my next sort of contention here. Dweg, I want you to imagine that this is a legitimate IEM Katowice analyst desk. We have you on, and we're saying, all right, Dweg, you casted some of these games. Let us know what you think. Who's going to win this? Who's going to take it all? So lay your prediction game on the line here. Who do you think has what it takes to take the whole thing?
I think it's going to be Spirit. If I'm going to be honest, I think a lot of people are going to either probably say NaVi or Astralis. But when I look at the regional matchups and I look at the way the bracket is, I think, right, Gambit probably not going to beat VP against NaVi. Sorry, I should say. I mean, maybe, but I have that as a pretty low percentage. Spirit versus NaVi, though, I'm kind of edging Spirit. I think that they've got the potential. And then probably what? Astralis, Liquid, Semi, and then, well, maybe VP. I think Astralis probably win that game. Then you've probably got Spirit, Astralis final, and I just think the momentum that Spirit are on, you know, they've won a couple of events in a row now. I have that feeling. Like, it's certainly a bit of a dark horse prediction, but the way that they played in both the play-ins and in the group stage, I don't want to say that they were flawless, but they had some like really decent wins. Like, even their game against Big, like, it didn't even feel like it was a challenge at all for them. Like, obviously in the playoffs it's going to be a challenge, right? Like, there's no other way of putting it. But when I think of where Spirit were like 4-5 months ago to where they are now, I think that like the players are getting hyped up. They're really hungry for a tournament win. Like, I can't even remember the last time Chopper won anything big. Maybe like in one of like the Star Ladder events or something on Vega. Like, it's been a while since he's won something big. It might have even been that Malta Championship Cup at the end of 2019 when they just picked up Mir and Magix, right? But for me, like, I'm just banking on Spirit to win Katowice.
That's audacious, Vu. What do you think?
You know, you might have actually won me over. Like, that was, you made some really good arguments. I mean, I feel like Astralis is kind of on a bit of a downswing. Gambit versus NaVi, it's not out of the question that Gambit could win that. But yeah, I mean, you're probably expecting NaVi to win. NaVi versus Spirit, you know, that's like, you know, is NaVi going to win that? It's tough to say, especially with the run that Spirit are on. You know, NaVi versus Spirit, it's mostly gone the way of NaVi, I think, you know, historically, but Spirit are obviously like very different than, you know, most of the times they've met in the past. You could definitely look at that one. You know, I think the winner is probably coming out of that side of the bracket. You know, I'd say, yeah, NaVi or Spirit probably win this one, in my opinion. Because it's just, how do you even predict NaVi versus Spirit? You know, it's just like,
yeah, you can't really. Like, you know, like, no matter what stats you've got and no matter what insight, unless you know that like a player's having an off day before the game starts, like, to call who's going to win between Spirit and NaVi in a domestic matchup, like, you really have to dig deep, and even you're going to struggle to get an answer there. Like, it's going to come down to who's playing the better CS on the day, at least for me, the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, I think a lot of the SCIS matchups come up to who's playing better on the day. And then if you play, I mean, I could see Spirit Liquid. I could see Liquid having a chance against Spirit. I think if Liquid playing NaVi, they could have a chance too. I feel like Liquid, I don't even know if they're going to make the final. You know, I like Liquid, but I don't even know they could lose to VP too. That side of both sides of these brackets are ridiculous, man. I'm giving this one, if I'm calling a winner, I'm calling NaVi, and I'm gonna pull a Maui snake, and I'm gonna call it NaVi 35%.
Give the percentages and everything. Look at this. So, I mean, Dweg, you just said you needed a bit of a crystal ball. Well, Vu seems confident enough. He's looking ahead into the future. Just imagine, imagine this for a second, though. I want to make a callback to a couple of episodes ago. I think it was the Blair one when we broke out the 8-year-olds for the first time. Maybe that was even the one before. I don't know. It's so long ago now. But imagine if Astralis are up against not only VP, but also NaVi after the fact, and it's Liquid obviously losing that map 3 Inferno, maybe in regulation, maybe in OT, but in this alternate reality, Astralis, they've got to defeat VP, they've got to defeat NaVi, and then they rematch against Spirit in the grand final. It would be like if all of those 8-year-olds were Russian instead, and they were just like judo kicking you to death. Like, that's what it seems like to me. They end up evading it if they can get past VP, but I actually think this is an underrated matchup right here in the quarterfinals. Like, I feel like this, especially since Astralis were so disappointing in that last map against Spirit, they have to have a chip on their shoulder, and they have to come out real swinging pretty hard here if they're going to take this one. VP are like, they can play so aggressive specifically to counter the styles of those tactical teams. We saw them, obviously, Vu mentioned, against Big, who are kind of known for that. And maybe you could say pressure got to Big because that was like the first high prize pool tournament that they were playing in Flashpoint. But it just doesn't add up to me. The fact that VP are so good at remaining competitive, even in rounds or entire games, realistically, that they probably shouldn't have a shot in. Every time I count them out, I'm always paying for it. So I won't necessarily predict VP to win the whole thing. I will say the safe bet as well. I'll stay with Vu with maybe a little bit more confidence that NaVi take it. But I do think it's going to be somebody from that side of the bracket. Like, it's whoever defeats NaVi, if NaVi get defeated at all, is going to win the whole tournament. And I don't think that Astralis or for that matter, Liquid really have what it takes. Normally, you would also favor, if Astralis make it all the way to the final and they're up against Spirit, you would favor Astralis to adapt and look back at their mistakes, but I don't think any adaptation would have saved them from a 16-1 loss. Like, that's pretty definitive in my mind. Maybe they just banned Dust 2 and that's their adaptation. That's the only thing I can think of. Just get it out of the pool. We don't want to play it. So, yeah, I still think that this playoffs is probably, it's a pretty exciting tournament in general, right? It's maybe the same level of hype, in fact, that I have looking ahead to this that I did when I was looking at obviously the Blast Global Finals themselves, where we did see NaVi take some games. We kind of had a bit of a lull in between where we looked at the spring groups, and maybe that's where we can turn some of our attention to now, because I'm not sure how much of those games that you caught, obviously these are a couple of weeks back now, but I think one of the main storylines was the fact that obviously NaVi still looked pretty decent, and we obviously have Complexity coming back in particular. I want to touch on this mostly, because for my money, Complexity going missing towards the late end of 2020 is like an ultimate tragedy that we didn't get to see that full 5-man lineup actually in play. We had Yugi standing in. There was a brief period where there was another lesser known sniper, and he's on the tip of my tongue. I think he's from Contact.
Was it?
NATO
from Contact,
NATO
it?
and Auton. Yeah, both of them. So they kind of had the revolving door of stand-ins from different nationalities, and it just felt like they never got on the ground running, especially with JKS for Oboe, and the fact that Poison obviously had that very, very, apparently like it was a relatively serious operation that he had to go into, right? It was maybe not life-threatening, but health-threatening, we'll say. I don't know the details specifically, but I'm glad that he's back on the server now, because he was taking some heads pretty convincingly in that particular tournament, and they had such a disappointing showing at Summit as well earlier in this year. So what do you guys make of Complexity specifically, Vu? I don't know if you've seen too much of them, or if you have any ideas about Poison since he's returned.
Yeah, I mean, it was getting to the point where you were thinking like, wow, are they going to have to just remove Poison?
Yeah.
Because he's just been gone so long, even though it seems like, it kind of sucks. But the reality is, you're in a competitive sport, right? If you can't make it to the game, you go on the LTR, the long-term injury list, and you get off the payroll, and then eventually you come back. But as soon as he as soon as he showed up, there was like a revitalization. It felt like in the roster. It felt like everything was kind of clicking, everything was going, and that it's hard to say if that's because Poison was playing fairly well. But sometimes it's just like, oh, we finally got our 5 guys. Like, let's play the game, right? Do really great at Blast Premier, and then barely. They kind of 2-1 Whistler Krakow, and then they lose to Mouse Sports with Dexter. And I'm a Dexter fan. I love Dexter, but like, really you're expecting Complexity to beat them. So I don't know. They're going like they did great at Blast. They did more than I want to say, like, I see all these teams beat Vitality at Blast and Katowice, and I'm like, they're beating Vitality. They're really good. Oh my God, they're beating Vitality. And then you just look at it for a second, you're like, oh, everybody's beat Vitality. Yep. They're doing real bad recently.
ATM machine, yeah.
Right. So like, it's hard to like pull these two things together, because like on one hand, I look at Complexity, I'm like, they beat Vitality. I'm high on Complexity, right? Liquid, they beat Vitality. I'm high on Liquid. And then it's just like, oh wait, hold on. It's actually like I'm low on Vitality. Like, it's hard to reconcile these two problems. I mean, they clearly look better with Poison, and hopefully they're on the upswing. Sometimes you have that where you bring someone back and there's a resurgence, and then you kind of do worse the next event, like the sophomore slump, you call it in sports.
Yes.
You can have it for the next event, that type of thing. I could definitely see that happening. I think Complexity doing well is like good for the scene, what's the big guy's name, dude?
Jason Lake? You talking about him?
No, BaitF. I can't remember BaitF's name. I think
I should have known.
Really
big guy,
good.
yeah.
It's a really good thing for the scene. I love me some Poison, some JKS, some BlameF, but it's tough to really predict where they're going to go, given they just immediately shit the bed right afterwards, kind of.
Yeah, before I throw it to you, Dweg, I have to say, I've had the pleasure, of casting Wisla Krakow a lot lately, and they are a team that has been mired in like motivation issues. For those who are not aware, and most people are not going to be aware, I mean, they brought in Goofy, which is just as goofy as it sounds, obviously, the fact that I have to say that on broadcast, by the way. And then on top of that, he hasn't really been finding form. Sort of did in a recent upset in ESA Premier, but that's nothing to write home about when you had the opportunity to really make a name for yourself at IEM Katowice. When they took a map against Complexity, it was off the back of Complexity playing abysmally. It was not like some really, really great play from the polls. It was the Complexity team running in one-on-one into a crosshair from Hades, the star sniper of that particular roster, definitely the best player of it, but obviously they just completely disrespected him. It felt like they did zero prep. That's how they get Mirage, and it's an overtime win as well. So even though Complexity are playing some of their worst Counter-Strike that we've seen, certainly with this 5-man lineup, especially off of the back of the Blast win, we just have to say it clearly is an issue where Complexity were like walking into that. It's not some crazy upset map take. And obviously they did eventually clean them up. But for them to lose against Mouse Sports, I think this is a roster, Mouse Sports that is, that really didn't have business defeating a full power Complexity. That's for sure. Like at their peak, it feels like Complexity can pretty much take on any team in the world and win any tournament if they want to. It just feels like for whatever reason they went missing in this tournament. So now I'll throw it over to you, Dweg. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that. Maybe you have some ideas on the Vizsla matchup specifically, or the Mouse one if you watched it. But I'm just so perplexed by Complexity's performance, specifically at Kato.
Well, I'm pretty sure I counted it that like I casted 56 maps of Vizsla Kakov last year,
Okay.
like just a crazy amount. And look, I think they're a team that they lack in the experience, right? You've got a lot of youngsters on this team that don't have a lot of experience at tier 1. Like I remember Spiro playing with like, do you remember when G2 like had the Polish team like before they even got involved? Would that may have been before they had like the G2 Kingwin like international FaZe team.
Yes,
might have been just before then. And he was going to majors, right? Like he was a secondary AWP and then in-game leader for the majority of his career. And then you've got Hades, who had never played on a professional team before joining Vizsla. Jedka played on XCOM. Ponchek, like I barely even heard of him when he started playing on Aves. And then Goofy hasn't had a lot of experience either. To be fair, though, like he looked really dominant playing on Pack for the last 6 months or so. And I think that this team has got the potential to do better in the tier 2 scene going into 2021, and then maybe have like a couple of decent affairs in tier 1 matches. But you've got to think that they're only going to get a map here or there. But I watched that game. It was actually like one of the only games I didn't cast. I watched it in the entirety. And like Hades looked great. Like I think that finally people started to realize that this guy wasn't just like an okay AWPer, and he's actually got a lot of potential behind him. Unfortunately, the Polish scene's in a bit of a weird one at the moment, that they had like the biggest roster shuffle in like the history of Polish CS at the start of the year. So I don't know where he can go to be in an immediate upgrade unless he goes to an international team. But that game, like on Nuke, I almost thought that Vizsla were going to take it. Like it was like 6-6, 6-7-ish. And then Ponchek lost a 1v1. And then Spiro lost a 1v1. And then like Complexity started really gaining momentum in that second half. But when I looked at that, I was like, geez, this is Complexity. Like almost losing to a somewhat average tier 2 team that have decent success. Then they face off against mouz, who have just added in Dexter. Like, yeah, I suppose the Dexter's had a bit of experience with Mytha, their coach in the past when he was coaching Renegades, but I don't think most people expected mouz to get out of this play-ins, or at least if they did, they'd have to do something really special. And I don't know about Complexity, man. Like, they've had it tough, right? Like, always without an AWPer. Like we know that JKS has been struggling. They finally Poison's back and he seems to be doing pretty well. JKS is still trying to find some form. Like obviously I don't know how he's feeling about this whole situation, but JKS has been a star player for like 6 years, and then all of a sudden he joins on to Complexity and he's really struggling. And I don't know whether that's because like Complexity is struggling. Like I think that there's some little bit of role overlap in terms of T sides with him and BaitF. I'm sure Complexity are going to come to a compromise and figure something out, because we know they can be a powerhouse, but this is like super disappointing from them.
Yeah. I think in no uncertain terms, Complexity definitely need to be doing better, especially in the next event. I mean, they're an org, right, with pedigree to uphold. Obviously, BaitF has been taking a number of heads, and the fact that they're just not able to find the same amount of success that we're used to for that particular brand, and not just like, okay, you had that one peak at Blast, but it's just been consistently bad in terms of their performances. At first, you could write it off as the fact that they don't have their full 5-man. That's not the case this time around, and with them finding immediate success, it's really weird to me. I would expect that to be flipped. They come in with their 5-man lineup, they don't hit the ground running, and then at IEM Katowice, they take us all the way to the finals, or they get deep in the playoffs, or show something, but they actually did the inverse and somehow like downgraded apparently. So yeah, and I'm curious, what do you got here, Vu?
I mean, it's one of those things where it's kind of like the Liquid doing really well at the end of 2020, right? Where the roster is dead, the roster's dead in the water. You're playing with twists, and you've already got your replacement lined up, and then you just do really well because everyone's kind of unchained and kind of doing their thing. And then it's not that the team should stay together because they did so well. It's they did well because they're not staying together. And then I think the same thing can happen when rosters initially change. Sometimes you have kind of an IGL hangover as well, where it's like you have a new IGL and they brought in a new system, but you've still got remnants of the old one, and they kind of mesh together in an effective manner. Usually that doesn't happen in the first event. I think usually when you bring in a new IGL, I'm thinking mouz specifically, usually they have a week or two, and then they really kind of have that a couple of events where they have the IGL hangover. It's worth noting that mouz Sports didn't do well in Katowice. They got 4-0'd total. And I think 2 of the maps they didn't get double digits. Admittedly, they had a really rough run of it. They had Astralis, then Gambit. And Astralis is obviously Astralis, and Gambit is, gonna be really tough to deal with, coming, for Dexter coming in. But I think that's worth noting, given that we're talking about complexity here. They lost to a mouz Sports team that didn't pick up a map in the actual event. I don't know. I'll give complexity a couple of events, but I'm like, this is like a short leash. This is like a couple of events before I'm kind of over it at this point, because they were they were pretty horrific for a while, and then they got one good event and then immediately smacked right back down to reality afterwards. I'll give them a couple of events, but after that, there's some changes need to happen. I guess, like, how do you justify removing JKS right after? I'm assuming they bought him out, right? Like, did they buy him out, or was he a free agent?
No, he was a pretty expensive transfer, I believe. Yeah,
was he?
Maybe the transfer fee wasn't a part of it, because I do believe that 100 Thieves just released him, but he is paid a very heavy salary, so it's not like he was a cheap acquisition.
Yeah, that probably sounds about right. Because, like, what was it? Like, they pretty much left to Extreme him without, like, any transfer or... So I think it was, like, towards the end of the contract is when Complexity were like, yes, let's go and get JKS. But, yeah, I can imagine that he's still on, like, mega bucks over there. I mean, pretty much everyone... And as well, like, everyone on the team's probably on a high salary. And, like, they've got the highest fragging in-game leader of all time, right? Like, BlameF's numbers are ridiculous for a caller. Why aren't the results here? Like, they look good at Blast Premier swing groups. Like, they didn't drop a single map right over Vitality, EG, and G2. But then before that, like, what are we seeing from them? Like, at least give us like a bit of a playoff run. Give us a grand final, even if they don't win it. Like, I just want to see something like top 2. I don't know. It's a tough one.
One thing to mention is all the teams they 2-0'd at Blast, I think, are teams that are not that great.
Sure.
G2 is they're okay, they're kind of okay. Vitality they're on a huge downswing. Vitality's a great team, but they're having their struggles, right? And then EG, I in my opinion, EG is like, they're just like, I don't even know how to rate this team. They have a few good games, but it's like, if you look at their wins, it's like, oh, look at that, Ethan ran 107 ADR like over a series. Like, okay. And then the next series, Breeze does really well. It's like, it doesn't seem like replicatable. So like, they could go into any series and either win or lose 50-50, man, either way. But I just don't see great things from EG. Vitality's on a downswing. It's not like they beat the best competition, although they did just look good, when they did it. I feel like it's not like they beat Liquid. It's not like they beat NaVi or something, like a real top, currently top team is what I'd say, because Vitality's looked pretty weak recently, I think.
Yeah, the whole IGL change seemed to have scuffed them a little bit, and then obviously Apex is back, but we don't know to what extent, so that's a bit of a question mark in and of itself. Talking of IGLs, I do want to linger a little bit on BlameF specifically, because obviously he's got great numbers. He always seems to be in a position to get those frags, seems to be calling around himself, and quite an impressive performance usually, even in some of their losses. My question to you guys is it time to start to consider whether or not his strategy actually works out, whether or not he is baiting, as everybody in Twitch chat will forever call him, like BaitF. Is that too uncharitable of a view? I feel like there's some truth to it, despite the fact that on its face it seems like there's definitely more going on beneath the surface. So I'll throw it back over to you, Vu. What do you got for BlameF specifically? Because given the fact that he found success in Blast, it seems like he's okay, right? He seems like he's got the plan, but something about it not working.
Yeah, that's a tough one because like you also have to recognize that people give a ton of credit to Complexity's coach, I believe it is, for the anti-stratting they
Kato,
do,
yeah.
right? Where they've talked about, I can't remember who it was, but it was like you've never seen it. Was like someone was talking about how they're about to play Complexity, and he's like, get ready for like you've never seen anti-stratting until you've been anti-stratted by Kato. You know, so there's a certain level of like credit that needs to be given there, and a certain level of like, you never know how much the coach is really inputting in these games.
Yes.
I don't know. It's kind of like it's like the Nico situation. You have a guy that's like IGLing. He's also an amazing player. Is he IGLing well? Or and his team is failing him, or is he IGLing poorly? I think you need to see some more roster changes, and like you need to see some more. I think you need to see a bit more before you really put it necessarily onto BlameF's shoulders. I feel like, I mean, in my opinion, they haven't looked great strategically without Poison. But could that be because they're just kind of like the team is just like kind of burnt? Is there something else to it? It's hard to really put that necessarily and say BlameF like right off as IGLing,
right?
But it's certainly like not worked.
So you said you were going to give him a few events, right? So I'll throw it over to you, Dweg, because you haven't really chimed in on how long you're willing to be charitable about this. Do you think that you start to consider BlameF as maybe a potential cause, or perhaps just a symptom, if they bomb out of a couple more events, or is he even the part you would change? Like, what's your take on the roster as far as like who's the weaknesses?
It's tough, right? Like, I think if Poison didn't have the whole like surgery, whatever it was, and he wasn't there, if he was staying and it was like a perm 5 and this was the way it was, then I think, okay, something's got to change here. But I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they've had, like, they didn't even use the same stand-in. Like,
Yeah.
that's what surprises me the most. Like, if you're going to use Otto, Neto Safix, or Yugi, where Otto's not playing for anyone at the moment because Contact's dead, Nato Safix has only recently been picked up by Lingby Vikings, and Yugi's not playing. All three of those guys not playing. Like, why wouldn't you use them for all three events, but yet you've used 3 different stand-ins for 3 different events? I don't know what happened there. I've heard that like Keitha, like a lot of good things from him, because I know that he comes from the UK scene. He was like an analyst for Complexity for a while before going over to the head coach role. They've also got a Ton, I think his name is like an analyst who like did a bit of work with 3D Max and G2 as well, if I remember correctly. But I don't know, like, I want to give Complexity the benefit of the doubt that with this permanent 5, give him another 3 months to really, get some results under the belt. I even say throw him back in tier 2, at least for a couple of events. Like, they played in those, like, what, Home Sweet Home Cups or something, like, in the summer last year, and they were, like, banging money. I think they made, like, 200K or something in, like, 4 or 5 events. Like, they were just absolutely destroying the tier 2 cups because they were like the massive tier 1 teams, while you've got like everyone else that's not even like top 30 playing in them. I think that for Complexity, they need to win, right? Like, they've been, like a Blast Premier Spring groups, they didn't drop a single map. But outside of that, when was the last time that we really saw Complexity doing some heavy damage and getting trophies? It's been a while. So I think for Complexity, like, don't forget tier 1, obviously, but I think if you just kind of dip your feet a little bit in tier 2 and go, okay, this is what it's like to win, I think that's got to be the success element going forward for them. Whether they do that or not, like, I don't know. But yeah, I want to put it down to not having the permanent 5, the rotating door of just stand-ins, and I hope results will come. And if they don't come within 3 months, I think some changes have got to be made, whether it's a role change, whether it's just replacing a player, whether it's replacing a coach, whether it's replacing an in-game leader, whatever it is. Something's got to change, because you're not putting this much money into a project to come 7th and 8th in every tournament. Like, it's as simple as that.
Can we imagine for a second JKS to Cloud9. I could see it working. I could see
You
it.
reckon?
Who would he be replacing? Zeppo?
See,
He's
that's
too
a tougher
soon.
question.
Floppy. He's like the star.
This is a tough. I would have wanted, like, when Cloud9 was getting formed, I wanted JKS to Cloud9. That seemed like such a clear roster move. It would have made sense for JKS to kind of like go in a project where he could be like a main focus as one of the top players. And he could play, you know, hopefully kind of, you know, be more comfortable instead of being kind of thrown into complexity. Now it's a little bit more challenging as to what to do. But I still think he could make it. You know, if he got on that roster, I think he'd make the roster a lot better. You know, maybe you make a trade. You know, maybe we get JKS over to Cloud9. I'd support Cloud9 with JKS. It's just crazy. The thing, like we already touched on. I mean, how as Jason Lake, how are you like? Yeah, we spent a lot of money on this guy. Let's just get rid of him, right? like I mean, a trade makes sense, right? Like a trade, if you could get a trade, but who are they going to trade for?
He didn't make bank off of Obo either, right? Released from the contract, so he's not even going to be getting any recoup for his loss. Like, it looked good on paper, and people were calling it, this is the roster move of the year, and then nothing. So much for that.
I mean, it made sense on paper. Yeah. The thing is, like, Dweg's like, when was the last time they did well? When they had Obo.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad. Like, that bridge is totally, like, how can the players, like, trust him? Yeah. Even if he said he would come back. The bridge is, like, burnt and then, like, just pissed on. It's been fucking burnt and pissed on. It's never, like, it's not happening. But the reality is, like,
let me get away for that title. ELO Heaven number 8 with Dweg, burnt and pissed on. Unreasonable, of course.
Man, I want complexity to be good. I like JKS. I like BlameF, but
like, even if you look at it from an org perspective, right? Like, think about complexity of where they've been, like, the last 5-6 years, right? They had that lineup with, like, Swag and Sean Gez and Semfus, like the early 2014 majors and what have you. Went to a couple of them. Then they kind of are like an average team. They pick up a couple of like UK players. Of Surreal goes over there. Then they pick up like Nothing and Shazam and Sick and Ricky. And we just don't see anything for so long for complexity that I think it just drops off massively. And it's like, right, boys, like, international lineup, here we go. All the hype, you know, BlameF's coming in, Rush is coming over. We've got some big names. Oh, Config and Poison are here as well. And it's like, oh, damn, you know, this is a complexity lineup that, like, we can actually be fans of for winning tournaments rather than being fans of the org or fans of just the players. And then everyone's like, fuck, like, roster move of the year, JKS. Like, the entire Oceania scene just gets entirely hyped. They're like, this guy who's been, like, carrying Vox Eminor, Renegades, 100 Thieves for, like, 6-7 years now. He's going over. It's going to be, like, the best move of the year. And it's not happening. Like, it's a tough pill to swallow. And I almost get the feeling that if this continues, maybe not even for 3 months, if this continues on for like another 2 tournaments, someone from management has got to step in here, right? Like, that's one of the big questions, is that sometimes it's not even the players or the coach that are making the decisions. It's got to come down to management. And if, you know, the guys that are holding the cash are like, you know what, we're putting too much into this and we're not seeing anything, then, you know, it's their choice at the end of the day. It's their team.
That's why it's so good to see Jason Lake specifically, right? Because he is passionate about results. He's not like an owner that's just going to let you get away with that, where it's like, oh well, we're spending money and it's a project. Like, we'll see how it returns, right? So yeah, I want him to succeed because of his passion. Obviously, I'm kind of a fan, like a rare fan of a CEO, right? An owner, but he's not going to let people get away with this, right?
It's just kind of unfortunate because, like, I feel like the complexity team, when they first put the roster together, it looked like a good roster, but it didn't look like nearly as good as it turned out to be, where they just like showed up and they just dominated like several events, right? And they were just like amazing. And then we set the expectations so high, and then, you know, it just come kind of crashing back down like below reality. Like, this is worse than it is. They kind of, the setup where they did so well at first almost kind of hurts them here in terms of the narrative, because if they hadn't done that well, then like this comeback for Poison, where like, you know, they do, you know, they don't lose a map for Blast, and then they, you know, they kind of fizzle out in the Katowice play-ins, which would still be looked at as a bad thing, right? But, you know, if they hadn't set the expectations that like we can win events, then, you know, this would be more reasonable. Maybe they just need to work back up to that, because I think I think, as far as I'm aware, didn't they spend a good amount of time just like kind of in the lab before they really even had their first event with the roster?
Yeah, that was
Could have been.
the announcement of their giant facility. It's like the GameStop branded training facility or whatever, and they have like these crazy tech. They simulate like on LAN events where they have like the temperature drop or like massive noise and shit. It's like you guys are literally in the hyperbolic time chamber at this point, and it looks really good initially. Like that's why I have less sympathy for them as an org at this point. They have so much investment behind them. The players have pretty much anything that they could want. Yeah, okay, we're in a post-COVID world in that sense, so maybe there's some sacrifices made, but I guarantee you they're being treated really well. Like they got all the amenities, they got everything you would want. So
Well,
yeah, I just don't see it happening that they come back from this.
isn't there a facility in North America though?
Yes, yeah, that's why when they're playing in
Yeah.
Europe, that's where my thinking goes too, is that they don't have that same backing, but that's where it looked like it's the ultimate Astralis fanboy argument that it's about the support staff, the sports psychologist. That's why our players are so good, because that's exactly what happened with Complexity. They come out swinging, as Vu mentioned, and it's maybe a lot of the attributions are this new roster that was just cobbled together gets a lot of LAN-like experience, and that's where they find their best form. And maybe the online area has a part to play in that. I don't know, but at this point, if you're not boot camping, I feel like you're probably just doing yourself a disservice. We saw that at Blast, actually, the global finals, right? Or no, it was the spring groups where EG finally looked like a team worth watching, and it was potentially off the back of them having a boot camp, right? A lot of the teams that were finding success were in the same room.
Was it Hawka that I think it might have been Hawka or Dinko that made a tweet about it, where it's like, you can directly link being at a boot camp to like the results at this event.
Yeah, Sponge had a tweet about it as well. He said, like, if EG finds success, then all three of the teams to win the first opening match have been in a boot camp together, and they were all kind of upsets in a way, or at least like maybe 60-40, and it's the 40. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, damn, I also want to say, like, it could be one of those things where, like, you're at a facility, you're practicing, you've got a few weeks in, and then you see this guy BaitF who's like putting in like 15 hours a day, and you're like, oh, this really motivates me. Yeah, let's put in all the time. And then you got like these sick results, and then you're like, all right, we got the sick results. Like, now let's just chill. Like, I just want to go back to my like, playing 8 hours a day thing. And BaitF's like, excuse me, hello, like, this is life.
His work
like, I
ethic
can
is
always
unmatched,
see
yeah.
that as like, I don't know, this is clearly not the reason for like their problems, but I can always see that as like an extra thing where it's just like you got that 15 hours a day motivation for like a few weeks to go into and do well, and then after that it's just like, we got the success, we got the fame, we got the money, we got the girls or boys, whatever you're into, we got it all. Let's chill, let's go party. And it's, nah, man, this is life, boys. This is how we live.
Well, that's another thing too, right? And it comes from BaitF's leadership, obviously. But if you have the success, then you buy in. If you start to lose tournaments, or you've got roster instability with stand-ins, and you're still being tasked with 15-hour days, like, where does the motivation come from? Because it doesn't look like the system is delivering results. So if we go over to a little bit of a different team that obviously had a more recent change, I wanted to talk a little bit about mouz sports, because I feel like I haven't heard pretty much anybody talk about this team, even though in theory, Dexter's an exciting move. They just got A-Core from Mad Lions, which of course that Danish team in particular seems to have just imploded. They've lost all their best players, obviously. So if we go into this one, looking at mouz, I was pretty sure that karrigan would be taking Rops with him to FaZe. And then, of course, they sign sign Twists. Obviously, you're not going to replace two players. You're just going to get karrigan for Olaf. And maybe we could talk about FaZe themselves as well. There's kind of some storylines over there a little bit later. But with mouz, I was expecting Rops to also go. And I think if he does, that roster will also be very short-lived. But so far, is this like a middle-of-the-road placing off of the back of a recent opper coming in? And obviously, the most recent move is your IGL. Like, do we think that they even had that much time to prep, since this move was rumored for quite a while, a couple weeks? So what do you make of mouz at IEM Kato, Dweg?
Yeah, I was kind of impressed knowing what they've got to work with, right? Like, when you bring in a new AWPer and a new in-game leader just before a tournament, it's going to be rough. And it's not going to be easy. But I thought that they looked like pretty decent. I think for Dexter, this is going to be a big challenge for him, because he's like, okay, maybe not just he's a player, but anyone from the Oceanic scene, we have not seen a lot of like international players go over, or Oceanic players that haven't played overseas, right?
Yeah.
You've got like Renegades that obviously did it. You had the whole Ricky thing, going to like CLG and then going over to Complexity. And then you had Winter Fox, which I won't even really dive too deep in. What do they go like 9-17 in Pro League or something like that? But look, that was a disaster. He went over there as like an in-game leader. He was fresh out of the Chiefs at the time, getting a little bit of hype, and then he goes over to Winter Fox, and that whole team just looks dreadful.
Right.
There was a lot of like talk behind the scenes that like I think they were living in two different houses, and one of them had like air conditioning and a spa, and then the other one had like nothing. And look, whatever it is, that project was a complete failure. They didn't do anything. He comes back to Australia and he's on Tainted Minds. Then he joins Greyhound. And we're like, okay, we're seeing something here. He goes to Asia Minor. We then start seeing Greyhound get international success. They come over or at least when the teams come over to IEM Sydney, they get a couple of good wins there. They go over to a couple of the DreamHacks. They went to Leipzig in the beginning of 2020, where they lost in the grand finals. And for him, he's joining, first of all, a brand new international team after being with, quote unquote, the boys for years now, where they're literally doming every single team in Oceania and not even like struggling. They're now going into Europe. And he's got to deal with like younger players. Like I know that all the teams that he's been a part of, whether it was with Winter Fox, you had APOC that was like almost 30, Zeusy was near 30, Offnew's mid-20s. He goes on to like Renegades, they're all like mid-20s. And then you join up with Mouse Sports, you've got Bemis that's like 16, 17. You've got Frozen that's like 18. Rops has got to be like 20 odds. So although they are experienced players and they've had a lot of experience at tier 1, maybe Bemis not as much as some of the other guys, but this is like maybe not so much a veteran player, but an older player with younger players. I think it's going to be a big challenge for him to see what he can actually like drill with all of them together.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have like, I feel like you're going to have that struggle when Dexter goes from, what did they win? Like they won every event, right? Since
9 events in a row. It was like crazy. I think they had like, they dropped like 15 maps out of 100 on that streak in 2020. And like ridiculous. Out of those 15 maps, I think like most of them was losing a map in the grand final, or like losing a map, or they lost like 4 best of 3s and won like 29, or like it's stupid. Like the amount of success they found.
Yeah, I've looked a bit into Dexter before the region locking, and I've been pretty hyped about him because he seems really aware. Like he seems like a really great player individually. Plus, when I first looked into him, I didn't even know he was calling as well, right? So it's like this addition where he's like not only amazing as a player, but also he's got additional abilities. And then he goes on to Mouse Sports, and it's definitely going to be a bit of a change, and it could be one of those things, like have to mention that you had what's his name, the coach of 100 Thieves went to Cloud9, and then
I'm a pet.
No,
Elmo Putty. Wait,
no.
Who are you talking about?
Kassad.
Yeah, okay.
Kassad,
I forgot he's
Kassad,
in Extremum now, so
yeah. Kassad goes to Cloud9, and something clearly doesn't fit, and then he's immediately left the roster. Like 2 months. A month later, right?
Nothing.
It's there could always be that, it's definitely possible that type of thing could happen. I don't know if I see that from Dexter. He seems like other than being an idiot and putting father on his Twitter, he seems like a smart enough dude.
I was amazed that he had so much time to practice and also look after a kid. That's incredible.
There's going to be some adjustment. I think the fact that they made it to Katowice in itself is good enough for me to be fairly content with it. And again, I mentioned, they didn't pick up a map, but they did play Astralis and Gambit. Gambit, it's going to be a team that's going to be tough to play against for a new roster, especially if you used to playing, a specific style of CS, a specific set of teams. It's going to be tough to play against, right? So I think they're exactly, that's exactly the results I would have expected from this team. If not, losing to Complexity, I would have expected based off what Complexity did at Blast, right? So give them a couple months, see how it goes. You know, I would give them longer than most other teams because of the changes they're making. You know, seem really big. And you know, bringing in a new IGL that's been in a region lock for a while. It's going to take a little while. I'm hyped for this team. I really think this team could do great things. I love Dexter. I like Rops. I'm excited for this team. I'm really high on the potential of mouse sports.
Yeah, it seems like a team to watch for sure, because I was coming in thinking that this was going to be kind of an underwhelming showing from them. Not only that, but I just expected, with Mousesports losing karrigan, I was kind of blinded at how good Dexter really was. And of course, I had completely forgotten about Acor, who admittedly didn't show us that much at Summit, but still is a sniper to be feared in his own right. And speaking of course, filling the shoes of karrigan specifically, he goes over to FaZe, and it's not the best debut. Let's be real. I was expecting a little bit more, but they do take on Liquid, who proved themselves to be a bit of a formidable opponent. So what do you make of FaZe at IEM Kato, Dweg? Do you have any hot takes for us, or is it just the more conventional answer of too early to tell? Because I personally expected karrigan to hit the ground running, right?
I certainly did. Like, we casted the FaZe OG game in the first round of the lower bracket, and they looked like proper good. But I suppose like OG, that's maybe a bit of a different discussion. But like they looked really on point. I thought the karrigan was getting some pretty good mid round calls. Like it seemed like he was reading the game well. They were hardly ever running into stacks on the T side. And like players were showing up. Like Twist on Mirage was like phenomenal. He was playing like top of con over at stairs, and he dropped like 22 kills or something in the first half. Brokey was missing God knows how many shots on that city side, and I was getting proper scared. Like when Brokey was missing like 7, 8, 9 shots on the city side, I was like, geez, like this is not going to be good for karrigan's debut, right? Like he comes in and you've got your main AWPer just like missing everything. He goes over on T side and he's just getting like run boosted out mid. He's just like, he's doing everything. And he dropped like 20 kills or something on the T side. That series wasn't even competitive at all. They absolutely smoked Vitality. They were up like 12-1 or 10-0 or something on the T side of Dust 2 to start. Like it just looked really good. Yeah, they did go down to Furia in the next game, but I think a lot of people expected FaZe to at least get playoffs, right? Like, I know you've got to be realistic. They've just brought in karrigan, and yeah, the only rain is there from the previous edition of when he was on the team. But we know that when karrigan joins any team, like they at least find some sort of immediate success, whether it's a playoff run, whether it's a tournament victory in the first couple of events. And I think that maybe the pressure was on, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But a lot of people probably had expectations of playoffs or we go to sleep on FaZe again, and unfortunately, they didn't make playoffs.
You nap it on FaZe, Vu? What do you think?
It seems like I'm the most positive person in the world when typically I'm known for the exact opposite. I don't think of myself as a negative person. It's other people that think of me as a negative person. Okay, but karrigan, of anyone that I love in CS, I love karrigan.
Agreed.
I think he's such a great IGL. I think the things he does as an IGL are just like so perfect. In terms of like, I love when I've seen this so countless times to even say, but like, you know, you see karrigan run a default once and then they never really return to that exact style of default again in a game, because he's just like, oh, we're gonna adjust this. Like I see the tendency here. Like we're gonna run this a little bit slower. Like, and it's like, you know, you see them, you can see that they're running a default, but it's like every round it's like adjusted slightly. It's like changing it up. It's like, it's really, really good. He's a really great IGL, just from watching the games. And then when you add on to that, the fact that he's known for like any player that plays with him that's in a career slump, they're going to have their best, like career best form, you know? I see him like bring Twist to like a whole new level. That's what I see happening there. And he's great for like join a roster, do well on the roster, like immediately. It takes a little bit of time, I think, for him to like get these players to like career best form. And Twist was, you know, in a bit of a slump on Liquid. So I could see him kind of, you know, he did have some ridiculous games. I think he didn't he like just drop like 100 ADR, like 1.4 rating against Liquid or something like something ridiculous like that. He just, he's had some great games, but I see over time karrigan's going to bring Twist to like career form, and that team's going to be great. I'm high on karrigan, man. I love karrigan. I think that he's going to do great things for that team, at least in the short term, at least in like, the next, I'd say in the next 2 to 7 months, they do really well. Maybe even 1 to 7 months, and then they might start falling off again.
It's just a team that's so easy to get excited about when you see the roster. I mean, people forget that maybe coldzera has been on this lineup for quite a while now, and if you have coldzera as like your secondary star, not even your primary, at that point the world should be your oyster, with Twists firing on pretty much all cylinders. Obviously karrigan's been known to pick up the secondary AWP as well and be quite proficient with it in their CT setups. Like, he just knows what angles to hold almost always, and we talked about that earlier, the fact that CTs are kind of revolving around those second ops when the economy favors them. So especially, like, they just have such a strong map pool. One thing that was really surprising is, I think it was Nuke specifically, that coldzera, when he was doing his brief stint as the caller, and obviously he had that famous line where he says, yeah, calling is hard, you just get fucked all the time. That was even his quote. So, that's a good one. It's certainly true as well, if you're not like a native caller in that sense. And yet, even so, I felt like coldzera figured out Nuke faster than Liquid Fallen figured out Nuke. Like, that was just a map that was kind of difficult for the Brazilians to take. And I would say the same about Inferno. Like, they just have, maybe it's just because of the different tools, they were able to take a brand new approach to it. But the fact that Cold kind of got them started with a system is kind of an underrated angle for that player specifically. And karrigan can slot in. Obviously, he's famous for just finding instant success. And I think maybe that's why I was a little overly critical about the FaZe lineup initially when I posed this question, because to me, this is a bit of a black mark on an otherwise unblemished career, where karrigan just slots into a roster and jumps straight up to playoff finishes, deep runs, makes you feel like he really is a contender. And it just didn't feel like that was the case this time. Viscerally watching the games, forget about where they actually placed. So what do you think, Dweg? Is this one of those cases where you saw some signs of life from FaZe early, like you mentioned the mid-round calling, for example? Do you think that FaZe not only have what it takes to obviously go higher than this, but can you see how they're going to put the pieces together? Or was this kind of like that honeymoon period where you just try to make stuff work with what you already have?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about the pieces, right? Because the one thing that scares me a little bit is that maybe karrigan doesn't have the right support. Like, and what I mean by that is that FaZe don't have anyone. They don't have a coach. They don't have an assistant coach. They don't have an analyst. Like, we know that they had Robin for a bit. They had Yanko like last year. And then over at mouz, you've got Mytha that came through. You've had like LMBT for a while. You had Region that was there. You've got like Intershine, I think, is their analyst. And I kind of look at him on FaZe and I'm like, yeah, karrigan's a great in-game leader. I think Vu said it really well, like them running a default, how there is like intricacies that, you don't see like round by round. It's always consistently changing. And, but I think that if karrigan is not getting the support behind him from the support stuff, I know that we talked about it a little bit early on. I don't know how important support stuff are, but knowing that you have no coach, no assistant coach, and no analyst, I feel like that maybe karrigan, like FaZe as a whole, might be leaning on him too much. And that's going to be a big test over the next few months to see if he can actually handle it. But at least from what I saw from him in the OG game, I was very impressed. They got like bombed by Liquid, right? In that first one, at least.
Yes.
There was only that one map that they got, like 11 or 12 rounds. And then I think the other one, they got like 5. And then they lost to Furia. So I think there is greener sides and there is something to look forward to for FaZe. But I almost kind of want to see them just bring in someone to help karrigan to not just put all the pressure on him without having any support staff behind him.
Yeah, I mean, getting themselves a coach is clearly something they really should have. The thing is, you have to question what the foundation he really comes into FaZe with. They haven't had a coach. coldzera did a good job, but is he kind of, maybe he's coming into FaZe with lacking some things that he was expecting, and maybe that's causing some problems. Because I'd say the most damning thing about this change is that they destroyed Liquid in the previous event, right? They played them twice and they won both
That's
times? Did they win
16-1.
both times?
Yes, and not only that, but of course it was Olaf with career form, and you think you've got a better roster with karrigan coming in, and it just wasn't the case this time.
Yeah,
Right?
I'd say that's like the only thing I'm kind of questioning is that they beat Liquid twice, and then they come into the next event and they get kind of just smacked by Liquid. Admittedly, Fallen has like a prime Fallen game or series against them, right? Which it's not going to happen every day, but that's the only thing that's making me question it. If they hadn't, if they had gotten 2-1 by Liquid, then I'd feel just fine about this outcome.
Yeah, I think that's fair as well, just to bring that up as a kind of an outlier of a result. Yanko's name was mentioned, of course, earlier, and imagine if he could have coached this roster instead of the previous one. I just feel like he would have slotted in, and obviously he's back to broadcast now, it looks like, for the foreseeable future, but I feel like he would have come in great. He's not even banned. I mean, apparently he's pretty good, so it's kind of a low bar. But when you also have to factor in, Robin will be stepping in when his ban expires. That's something to think about because Robin was behind them during like kind of the height of the old school FaZe lineup when karrigan was behind them. So there's going to be some innate synergy there, but yeah, the support staff just feels like it certainly could be pointed to as maybe overly pressurized. Obviously, when mousesports' coaches as well were banned, you have to remember that karrigan was sort of doing the coach's role himself towards the tail end of his time with that lineup. And I wonder if maybe that gave him the wrong impression. Like I felt like it was kind of, even though it had run its course in a sense, I expected players to come to karrigan, not karrigan to go to other teams. And when he left mousesports, or when it was announced that he was leaving mousesports, maybe that could be related to the coaching thing specifically. The fact that he had to act as like the coach, manager, IGL, second op, fragger, entry fragger, right? Like all these roles, he's wearing so many hats that he just has no space on his head anymore, as big as it is, right? So you have to just wonder, like, there's only so much one brain can sort of shoulder in that respect. And that is a lot of like out of game responsibility to be shouldering. And then that's before you even get into the server. So yeah, I still think FaZe should be able to bounce back for sure. And for a lot of the reasons that everybody keeps saying, especially their roster and the fact that eventually Robin will be in there to support that. Going into some of these other teams, I do want to briefly touch on OG just because they are a team that, as Dweg mentioned, like, they kind of have that gatekeeper status almost in my mind because they're not really good enough to go deep at these tournaments. But if you're not good enough to beat OG, you're not good enough to go deep in these tournaments either. Like, they're kind of almost hard and fast in that respect, although they have been on a bit of a down slope lately. So, Vu, how long is too long before OG starts to make roster moves? Because I feel like it should have happened like a couple months ago, personally.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed there's a bunch of teams where it seemed like a no-brainer to make some specific changes at some specific moments. And Issa being replaced for I think I've personally talked about Obo. And I mean JKS could have, I guess, made sense. You
said Twists when he was up from Liquid.
Yeah,
before
Twist. There's the other one I was thinking of. Yeah, Twist would have made a lot of sense. That's a change that really, if OG was a team that really wanted to win now, and the org was willing to spend money, I would have expected them to pick up one of those free agents, at some point. It really seems like a no-brainer because I think they've had kind of a bit of an upswing and then back to a downswing again, right? Which is. It's a roster that's expected to do better, I think, than it's doing. So I would have expected if they were willing to make changes, they would have already made changes. I'm not sure why they'd wait this long. But then you've got this quote from Alexa B recently where he's saying, it's the quote is like, it's tough because I know Issa's kind of like glue on LAN and he does so well, right? Like basically saying, we've wanted to remove Issa, by the way, but we're not, is basically what the quote was. So are they really just waiting it out? I guess like people are kind of thinking we're only months away maybe from kind of going back to potential LAN play. So I could see now being a time when a team is willing to wait it out and see. But then if they are going to wait it out and see, and when LANs come back, there's a very short leash. This is all assuming OG's willing to put in the money and make changes. But you never know because they did just like basically put together this roster and then the roster's just like, all right, go play with the kids in the playground, like have fun, like you're not getting it. I don't know if they're saying you're not getting anything else from us, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had like that FaZe situation where it's just like, you're getting free players or you're getting nobody. Like this is what's happening.
Yeah, I just feel like the perpetual, seemingly infinite carrot and stick of wait for LAN is a kind of a played out excuse at this point, just because we have no real idea when it's coming back. People thought Katowice was going to be a LAN. People speculated there was going to be a LAN at the end of the last year, in fact, for Flashpoint or the Global Challenge, and it's just never happened. It's like nuclear fusion or something. Like, oh yeah, it's just a year down the line, don't worry, and it never happens at all. So hopefully it comes back this year. And I would say if you had a bet, probably bet on that in that sense, but I don't think that's sufficient for OG. I think they need to show us an upward trajectory before they even get there. So, like, what do you make of this, Dweg? Do you even see right now, like, a current roster move that you would make, even of the available free agents? Or, like, is it going to be a gamble for OG, even if they do cut Issa? What do you make of it?
Look, I think it's a bullshit excuse for any team to be like, oh, we're waiting for LAN.
Yeah.
Because even if we get to LAN, let's just say, hypothetically, right? We've got a couple of, the ESL roadmap is kind of already out about some of the events that are happening on this year.
Right.
Now, even if we get it on LAN, you're going to be playing on LAN, but probably not without a crowd. So does that then start to strike onto a player? You know, Issa's great on LAN, but if he's not getting hyped with the crowd getting hyped, is then he not hyped up? You know, is he not delivering? I think that teams have got to look at where they are right now rather than what's happening in the future. Like, what's saying that, like, you know, 3 months later, oh, we're getting Katowice or Cologne's coming back. Oh, there's another COVID variant. Oh, we're going back to online again. Like, It's just a bullshit excuse. Honestly, you've got to work with what you have. And what we have right now is an online era. I think Issa is still playing from Jordan. I know that a lot of the Middle Eastern players, or at least around that region, do struggle with the ping. And I know that he's playing on like 60, 80 ping. It's just going to be tough, right? And maybe if COVID didn't happen and we weren't in this situation, yeah, maybe Issa is not even thinking about getting kicked from his teammates. Or like maybe he is a player that is really striking as one of their star elements, but he's not at the moment. And I really thought that Diha could have been a player to replace Issa. Like he's joined Ent and looked absolutely phenomenal. He looked really consistent when he was playing with Sprout when they went back to German side. Like there were so many good players out there in the tier 2 scene, like there were free agents around that Christmas time period where I was like, you know what, give some of them a chance, right? Like you look at this OG side, they formed in what, December 2019? We haven't seen a single roster change from them. And it's not as if they're like getting results and you're like, okay, well, we don't need a change. Like they got second at Flashpoint. They lost to VP in the finals there, and they lost to FaZe in the final. Was that was it Global Challenge? I can't remember where they lost to
I think
FaZe.
that was an IEM event, but it wasn't Global Challenge a couple months earlier,
Yeah. And other than that, like that is it. Like that is all we're seeing from OG. When you talk about mouse sports, right? You're like, oh, okay, like, oh, Dexter, you know, there's a lot of hype around him. Oh, FaZe karrigan's coming back. I don't look at anyone on this lineup in particular and get hype around them. Yeah, Lexi P is a great in-game leader. We've seen what he's been able to do with Ents in the past. But I think that this team has been so stale with results for so long that people are just not even like thinking about them at the moment. And results need to be better. Yes, they got second at Flashpoint. They're taking home a massive paycheck of whatever that was at second place rather than first. But it's not good enough from OG. And to go out again, they looked okay. They beat Fnatic in the best of one. They had a tight series against Liquid. They beat Cloud9. But all in all, like, I think we just expect more. And it seems like we're saying that again about a lot of these teams. But OG have got to make a change. Like, you can't just be thinking, we're waiting for LAN. We're waiting for LAN. You've got to adapt to the current landscape. That's the way I look at it.
We're getting towards the...
go ahead. He made a really good point there. I just wanted to touch on where, you know, if you're going back to LAN and you don't have a crowd, is it really the same? Is that really what you're, you know, what you're expecting? Are your players really going to get hyped? Like that's something like I hadn't even really thought of that. You know, LAN does have like some performance changes in terms of just the way the game plays out when you're all on low ping, especially, you know, as you said, Is probably playing on very high ping. But also, by the way, when you go from playing on 60, 80 ping, where you're just like wide swinging every angle because you've got ridiculous ping, and then you go to 0 ping and it's like, oh, by the way, holding angles is now effective, right? Like it's, you know, you're not necessarily going to do really well on your first event when you make that change. And then if, you know, if there's no crowd and you're not getting that hype that, you know, Alexa B mentioned, I mean, there's no expectation that, you know, what you would need is the first few events to make that make any sense. The first few events, you go back to LAN, it would have to be great. The team would have to do really well, right? And if you go back to events and there's no crowd and then it doesn't work, there's no like, well, let's wait for a crowd. Like, it's getting it's getting out of hand. It's already getting out of hand. Yeah. As you said, it's getting out of hand already. It's getting even more out of hand. Like, if you're just like, oh, it's the crowds here. Then, it's. I think it's just tough for players to like kind of conceptualize it, where you've been drilled in your whole life. It's like, nobody cares about online. Yes. Nobody cares. It's all about LAN. And then you go to this like time period where it's like the results are okay. It's not like you're pulling a complexity. It feels like, and just like bombing out all the time. Yeah. But they're not what they should be. They're not what you're expecting. They're not what the team was put together for. The team was put together to be a quite a solid roster, and actually win some events potentially. And every player on that roster, you would think, a lot of players on the roster, at least, let's not say every player, are like players that you could expect to be on a championship roster. Yes. So it's just tough. I think it's just tough for players to conceptualize that, because I think saying waiting for LAN is ridiculous is not an unreasonable stance to have. Yeah. I would be changing rosters. I would expect most teams to be changing rosters, and the fact that someone still is out there saying, "Well, we're waiting for LAN," almost feels like there must be something else to it. Like, is it really that they're waiting for LAN, or are they just kind of making an excuse for like why they like ISA and they don't want to change the roster or something? You never know.
Yeah, I have to agree with that point in general, right? Because at this point, we've obviously labored on the point of the LANs being uncertain when they return. But even if they were next week, like, there is no guarantee that they transition immediately, that they find that form. And maybe if it was announced next week there is going to be a LAN and OG are at it, okay, then you can finally say this is your last chance saloon. But odds are not in their favor. And I also think the fact that I almost forgot to mention them on this episode, as Dweg says, nobody seems to even be talking about them half the time. Yep. And that is a problem as well. You start to erode that mind share, so to speak, for the fans. And I mean, obviously, it's not like they were a super popular team in CS anyway, more known for their Dota stuff, but it just doesn't feel like the org themselves have invested that much. And obviously Alexa B, as well as Mantu's rise as a non-opper to become essentially a tier 1 contender with the sniper rifle. For me, it feels like that's a team that I can get behind and root for, especially Valde as well, who languished in North for a while in that Danish scene. And I want to see a lot of these players succeed. I would have counted Issa in that crew as well. Obviously counted out just because of where he's from and how there's not really a proving ground for him. And initially he did look money, but OG have been a far cry from that now. And it just feels like it's time to start making some changes. Time to start changing who you're sending those paychecks out to, in my opinion. So,
just quickly, I want to just touch a little bit on OG from just some of the notes I was making while actually watching them against FaZe. The 2 games that they played in the playoffs, they didn't win a single map. They went 0-2 down against Vitality, then 0-2 against FaZe. Every single best of 3 they played in the play-ins and the group stage, they didn't win their map pick. So against Liquid, they picked Mirage. They got 7 rounds. They picked into Overpass against Cloud9. They got 11 rounds. And against Vitality on the T side, actually, no, I casted OG in Vitality and OG in FaZe. So I casted both of OG's games in Group B, and he went 7 and 25 on the T side of both maps against Vitality. And for me, like, Mantu's either really great or just not seen at all. I know that he had like a wrist injury or something like that, and he's had some pain over the last couple of months. Whatever it is, you can't be dropping 7 kills on both maps on T side combined against Vitality when you go into even OT on Nuke. Like, come on. It's just, you can't have players that just don't show up. And I look at OG and you look at the stats and you even look at some of their games, and there's just players that just go incredibly quiet out of nowhere.
Must be impossible as well to keep track of like who, if everybody on the roster's gone invisible, then at that point you're just walking wounded all the time. I'm sure that their economy probably looked a mess in those games as well, just intuitively hearing you talk about that. It sounds like they didn't always have the best read. Maybe Mantu never got set up with that AWP in the first place. But on the T side and some of these maps as well, you just expect him to be more on point. maybe that's like that feels a little bit more inconsistent from his form to me. He does seem like a hot and cold type player, but he's been more hot than he's been cold. So my instinct there is to say it's indicative of like the system itself failing. Maybe Issa getting a little bit antsy, seeing all the commentary online, of course, can affect you as a player if you don't tune that out. And we already know, based on what Thorin has said about the Flashpoint final and all of that stuff, that it's very obvious Issa seems to have an idea of what he wants to do, what he wants the team to do, and he pushes back against Alexi B of all people, which just seems totally absurd on its face to think that maybe he can secondary call in some scenario, but you got to listen to the master at this point, right? Like he's got the pedigree for it, and if he's doing that and maybe sabotaging the system from within, it makes kind of sense in that sense, right? You kind of expect that there's going to be some downstream consequences that maybe are more than just Issa himself playing poorly. So I don't know how overblown that story really is of Issa literally kind of shouting over Alexi B in some of the Flashpoint games. And I don't know if it's been something that they've been fixed behind the scenes after the fact. Obviously, I'm not privy to that particular information. But if that is accurate and it's still not been resolved, that's something that Thorin pointed out in one of his recent videos, specifically about Issa. The comms have been a mess for that team for quite a while, unless Alexi B gets the opportunity to tell everybody to shut up and call up those comebacks. And I think if you have to do that as an IGL for 6 months, a year, almost 2 years now, it's just ridiculous, right? Like you can't expect to succeed in that sort of working condition.
It would have been nice if this is a move people didn't even think about because Sergey retired to the military just like out of the blue. But Sergey to OG would have been pretty cool too, and it would have given people talk about Finnish, right? They're Finnish. Yes. I literally, this has happened on a previous episode. Right? I like to just forget the name. Yeah, they talk about how they're like, they're kind of quiet, and they especially in interviews, they have like this weird type of humor, and giving someone to Alexa B who's been in his system before, great player, like that would have been a sick change. I think it's a shame that like somehow Alu has driven Sergey to the military, like
career suicide. Yeah. Driven to the military. That's it.
Because that's a change like nobody thought about because he was on on ENCE, but that would have been a sick change, I think. And maybe that would make things, make the comms a little bit better too if you have people that are a little bit less talkative. Because especially, I know the Brits are known for their talkative language, and if Issa's got that as well, then and NBK's obviously got he's always input his opinion, then you've got kind of a recipe for a team that might not operate all that effectively.
Yeah. And that's just one of those like final notes to touch on about OG specifically, right? Is it's not just like the comms are messy, it's just for like the length of time that they have been. And it kind of underscores your point, Dweg, about the fact that they've had so many opportunities to not even necessarily take a risk. Like Sergey literally played with Alexi B at the height of ENCE's success. A lot of the players that you name dropped earlier, like Diha from Sprout, obviously, like he's money. He's shown that he's money. It's not even a gamble at that point. Like, I guess you're gambling that maybe the first event goes a little bit south because you have to slot him into the system and maybe he's not used to playing at that level of Counter-Strike. But it seems like there's so many no-brainer moves, and from a management that initially, when they made a splash in the scene in December of 2019, they said, we're here to take championships just like in our Dota 2 roster. That was kind of the implication. Like, we're going to be looking to be the best in both games. And they've been anything but, obviously. Like, they've just been a far cry.
One thing to point out is that I believe it was the OG roster that was rumored for a long time, and they were, it was like the rumors kept changing. It was like, are they going to pick up? I can't remember who else, but it was like there was a different roster they were looking at, and then there was like a full roster, and at some point there was like there was like another team that was going to get made, and it seemed like they just didn't have a lot of money to invest.
Is Poison for Mantu is what you might be thinking about?
Yeah,
Poison
there you go. I think they got looked over for a few different opportunities because they just didn't have the money or the clout or something. The OG, the org, not the roster itself. So it wouldn't surprise me if like they're just not giving maybe the resources that the team needs, given what we've seen suggesting they don't have that much money.
Yeah, it could be the case for sure. We're coming towards the end of the episode at this point, so I want to throw it back to you, Dweg, and maybe you can give me a team that we haven't talked about or a team that we already did, but you want to make another point on, sort of like your sort of last sort of segment here on ELO Heaven, and maybe let me know what you think about some of these teams that maybe we passed over so far.
I think EG was kind of one we passed over a little bit. I think just incredibly disappointing from them. Like,
Yes,
they had a close game against G2. Like, it was 2 14-16 losses, and I didn't think they played badly, but I just get the sense that when I watch them, that again, the players can just be so up and down. Like, Breezy was having such a sick game, and then Cirque just felt like he wasn't hitting anything until like round 26, and then I don't know. Like, I think for EG, like, is that another team that hasn't made a roster move in so long? Like, I even think as I remember originally talking with Cirque when he was still playing on Outlaws, like in the Bulgarian scene. Like, he'd been playing with like the NRG core for what, 4 years now? And I just get the feeling that they've been together for so long that like it needs a shakeup right over there. Something needs to happen for EG. It's another disappointing result. They've been in EU for like 40-50 days now, and they've really done nothing exciting. I think Gambit have been a really hot prospect. I think that like they were looking really good last year, and then they added in Hobbit, and literally like every tier 2 commentator was like, what is going on here? Like, this is the most stupid roster move of all time. You've got a team that are finally doing something out of like these players that we've never heard of before. Gambit youngsters, he has like 3 bad tournaments, and everyone's like, yeah, nah, worst roster move. Like, Super was doing fine, and then Hobbit's really starting to come through. He was the second highest rated player in the play-ins. He got them through some really big victories to progress forward into the playoffs. And I think for Gambit, like, although they're a really young team, like, they've got some serious talent. Like, Axel and Shiro are incredibly sharp. Hobbit has some really big games too. I know that he helps out with secondary calling with Nafani.
yep.
But like, I think this is a team like 2021. Maybe they don't get a massive amount of opportunities at Tier 1 CS. Maybe they do, but like, they're a team to watch out for 100%.
I think the online era has really given room for a lot of teams to make excuses and not make roster changes. You know, I think
For sure.
if almost all these teams we're talking about, if this was on LAN, these roster moves would have been done. You know,
Yes.
these changes would have been done. I think I heard rumor, you know, EG had like some downswing in like 2019, and they were like a month into like a bit of a downswing, you know, just a bit of a slump. And there was already like, I heard rumors of them talking with Liquid, like maybe a trade was going to happen at some point, you know, like some stuff like that. And it's like, now you've gone a year where EG is like, I mean, they had the really good beginning of the online era, I think it was, right? There was like, they just won every event for a while.
In
and
NA,
then, and then you go downhill from there. And it's just like, now they're, you know, admittedly in the last event, I think they got a few, you know, series victories. But I don't think they looked like they should. You know, they're a team that's, you know, been one of the best in the world. I'm not sure if they ever made it to rank 1, but they made it at least, like, you know, they
Number
won
2
some
at
events.
some point, yeah.
Yeah, they won some events, and you know, that's not what you're expecting. But you've always got this excuse. Well, we haven't been in Europe. You know, it's just online CS. Like, all this, it's just more excuses for players not to want to make changes, and for the org to come around and be like, "Yo, guys, what's going on?" And there's more excuses. There's more reasoning behind why things are going wrong. So, yeah, I mean, I think they need a leadership change personally. I think the players are all capable. Even if you just had, I think I've said this before, I'm not sure if it was on the show, but even if you just had like Tarek start calling or something, I feel like that could change things. Because personally, I just feel like they've kind of had a style for a while, and it's like clearly things have changed on an individual basis, and then the style hasn't really changed to keep up with that. To like, you know, make them relevant with some players kind of playing worse or less consistently than they should. But you know, something's got to change for them, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think to follow up on that as well, one of the teams that they defeated at the Blast Spring, when one of the rare wins EG have ever posted, was against G2, of course, and they're another team that's just been like careening down despite obviously the Nico roster move. And you know, that was a very expensive move. FaZe basically paid for Twists and karrigan off of the back of just Nico alone, like a ridiculous buyout probably. And Carlos is the kind of owner to do that, obviously over in the League of Legends team as well. So obviously you look at this and you think, okay, now Nico doesn't need to call. He can can actually play the way that he should be playing, where he's just left clicking heads and there's no other responsibility necessary. Just do that. Please just do that. Please don't start doing anything else. Certainly don't open your mouth while you're in the middle of the game. Please don't. So after that happens, we then have obviously like Hunter start to take a career downturn where he plays like the worst CS that he's played, it seems like, in a long time. Kenny S obviously not doing much better. So with both of the previous stars of this G2 roster seemingly making so much space for Nico, it also feels like they're just underperforming as a roster at this point. And initially they had some success, but it quickly fell apart afterwards, right? So just as a lasting sort of note, I wanted to mention G2 here, throw their hat in the ring, because we didn't really cover them too much. So I don't know if you guys have any final words here or final thoughts on them specifically, but I think it's been so disappointing to see both Hunter and Kenny S dip so low. And Nico not, obviously, it's kind of unreasonable to expect him to pick up all of the slack that's given by those two players, but he hasn't even really come close, in my opinion.
I would say Nico and I would say Hunter underperforming.
Yes.
I would put that. There's definite reason to believe that could be at least partially because Nico's on the roster. Like, I think those two things could very easily be somewhat related. I don't think Kenny S underperforming should be related to Nico. So you can't really put that on his shoulders. Sure. But I mean, even when Kenny S is doing well, I feel like that team is essentially like, it's not any better. Like, you can't say the team is any better with Nico than it was beforehand. Yep. Even if you just imagine Kenny S kind of playing decent CS, the team, I feel like, would be basically the same level that they were before, which is like, well, you just spent a shit ton of money for nothing, basically, you know?
What do you think, Dweg? Sort of last words here on G2.
You know what? I almost get the feeling that, like, if this continues, G2 are going to kind of turn into crazy, where they're like, oh, you know what? We've kind of got, Nico, Nexa, Hunter. Let's just, like, bring Otto or, like, Ships or Esperado over as well. Let's just make it an international team. Let's just get rid of Kenny S and Amanek. I don't know. Like, I think Vu's, like, touched on it really well. Like, they have brought in Nico, and Hunter is just really underperformed. I don't think the results are getting any better, or at least haven't looked any better. They looked okay in this event. Like, it wasn't anything too fantastic. I watched their game against Gambit, and I was hoping for more from them. I know that Gambit certainly on the rise, but going, 11-16 on Vertigo and Dust 2 wasn't really a lot there.
No.
And then when you just beat EG in 16-14, when Amanek gets a 3K on both maps in round 30 to just get you the win, when EG are underperforming too, I just feel like for G2, if you're going to pay all that money and the results are going to be the same, well, then it's just not worth it at all. I don't know what the way is going forward for them to make it a championship side, because I look at the players and I go, right, the players are there, but I just don't look at G2 as being a team that can lift trophies. I just don't think they've got that X-Fire behind them. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they come into 2021 in the summer and start putting up some really good results now that Nico's finding his form. Maybe Hunter starts finding some of his form back. But I just look at this team and I don't have the highest of expectations for them.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny if you look at G2 and you look at EG. They're like they've played each other like 3 times in like a week, like 2 weeks or something, and it's like so basically, if both of like these teams could, if you just look at the results, right, it's like, well, if one of these teams is the best in the world, then this is really good, but if they're both dog shit, then this is really bad.
Tune out now.
It's just like, if you just look at the results, like just scrolling through them, it's like, okay, so how good is EG, how good is G2? These are inextricably linked, and I think, I don't think EG is great, and so obviously G2 is not doing too hot,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to throw them in at the end. Obviously, convenient timing since EG have traded blows, we could say, but it hasn't looked good, as Dweg mentioned, and of course as Vu underscores there. So I think that'll do it for ELO Heaven number 8. Dweg, it was a pleasure to have you on, and for sure we're going to be keeping an eye out on whatever next tournament you might be casting, of course. Hopefully at the tier 1 level once again. So solid job on those, right?
Yeah, make sure to hit the DMs, hit the email, because I don't know when the next one's going to be coming, that's for sure.
Nobody does,
but, no one knows, yeah.
All right. Well, that'll do it here, unless Vu has some final words here. You got anybody?
Hopefully no Reddit threads are made about the next event.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, here's to no Reddit threads. Thanks for joining us for ELO Heaven number 8, and we'll see you on the next one.